Hey guys, tonight we're doing something a little different. We're not climbing mountains or drifting off in ancient temples or even wandering haunted castles. Nope. Tonight, you're going to the filth-soaked heart of 1800s Manhattan, to a place so infamous, so wretched, so downright unlivable, it made hell look like it had better plumbing. Welcome to the 5 Points. Now, just to be crystal clear, you probably won't survive this. No offence, it's just that between the cholera, the fire traps, the gang brawls, and the very real chance of being stabbed for your shoes, the odds aren't exactly in your favour, but don't worry, we're only mentally time-travelling tonight. No tetanus risk. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm not trying to trick the algorithm with a sympathy click. Also, where are you watching from? Drop your city and the time in the comments. I'm always curious who's drifting off into history with me. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing that hits you is the smell. It's a swampy bouquet of dead things, sweat, open sewers, old meat and coal smoke. That last part? That's the only thing masking the rest of it. You're standing in the middle of a place called the 5 Points, a cramped intersection in lower Manhattan where 5 streets collide in a tangle of chaos. Anthony, Cross, Orange, Mulberry and Little Water. None of these names mean anything to modern New Yorkers anymore. They've been scrubbed clean like the rest of the city, but back in the mid-1800s this was the pit. Muddy, loud and vibrating with tension, the 5 Points is alive in the worst way. Kids are barefoot and feral, shouting in a half-dozen languages. Pigs roam the streets, not metaphorical ones, real, snorting pigs. Stray dogs scrap for scraps. Overhead, laundry lines droop between tenement windows. Below, cracked cobblestones form a kind of open-air obstacle course, lined with horse dung and suspicious puddles. The buildings lean in like they're eavesdropping. Most are 3 or 4 stories of rotting wood and brick, stacked with immigrants who arrived days ago and have already aged 10 years in the face. The Old Brewery looms like a fortress, housing up to 1,000 souls in one structure. You walk past it, ears catching whispers from the shadows. It's not a safe place to linger, not even during daylight. You brush shoulders with someone and they scowl. You look down a side alley and catch a glint of a blade. A child runs by holding a rat like it's a prize welcome to the neighbourhood. By 1850, this area is so notorious that even European tourists come to gawk. Charles Dickens himself walked through here during a visit and was so horrified he spent the next several chapters of his book just processing it. And this is Dickens, who created fictional slums for a living. Imagine what it took to rattle him. Historically, the 5 Points grew out of a topographical disaster. The land was once a pond. Collect Pond, to be specific. Lovely name, right? But by the late 1700s, it was a festering pool of tannery runoff and garbage. The city, in its infinite wisdom, decided to fill it in and build on top. The result? The ground buckled, the foundations sank, and the buildings began warping like they were melting. That's your fun historical fact for the evening. The 5 Points literally rose out of a failed swamp reclamation project. And instead of turning into a park or a parade ground, it turned into a living sociological pressure cooker. Fringe fact. Archaeologists actually did dig here in the late 20th century, and they found thousands of artefacts: combs, broken plates, doll heads, bone buttons, rusted razors, a full street's worth of trash and memory, frozen in muck. Like Pompeii. If Pompeii had more whiskey bottles and no volcano to blame, now let's talk about something scholars are still bickering over. Was the 5 Points really as bad as the newspapers said? Some say the press exaggerated things to push an anti-immigrant agenda, especially against the Irish. Others argue that, no, it was actually worse than the headlines could capture, and the reporters just ran out of metaphors for unimaginable suffering. The truth? Probably a foul little stew of both, but no matter how you frame it, life here is brutal. There's a sort of desperate rhythm to the place, a pulse that beats with fight-or-flight intensity. Every man, woman and child is hustling, selling coal, shining shoes, lifting wallets, or performing some grim parody of a job to make it through the week. And you? You're going to need allies. You duck into a cellar where whiskey's being poured from barrels that have seen better centuries. The lighting is candle-based, the air smoky. A man in a stovepipe hat is betting coins on a knife game played between the spread fingers of a drunk. A woman near the bar has brass knuckles hanging from her belt like jewellery. No one's smiling. No one's drunk enough to pretend they're safe. Outside again, you catch the sound of fists, wet and sharp, and follow it to a half-formed ring in the dirt where two shirtless men are beating each other bloody while others shout bets. These aren't matches, they're messages. Fights mean territory, revenge, or entertainment, sometimes all three. And remember, the gangs aren't just fringe elements here. They are the structure. They keep order. They enforce chaos. The Dead Rabbits, the Bowery Boys, the Roach Guards, these aren't just punk kids with sticks, they're your neighbours. They're the only police you'll see. And trust me, they don't wear badges. You find yourself weaving through a street market where bootleg apples rot beside stolen shoes. Someone's selling boot black made from melted tyres and soot. A boy no older than 8 offers to protect you for a nickel or rob you for free. It's an economy based on risk. And then comes the church bell, clang, clang, signalling nothing holy, just the hour. Somewhere in this mess, a pickpocket's hand slips into a pocket and comes out empty. He'll pay for that later. So yeah, welcome to the 5 Points. You're going to want to keep moving, eyes open, chin down, heart steady. Things are only going to get worse from here. You don't sleep much in the 5 Points, not unless you're trying to get robbed, kicked, or set on fire. The walls are too thin, the rats too bold, and the neighbours too drunk to keep it down. But even if you do manage a little rest, the ground beneath you isn't exactly supportive. Literally. You see, this part of Manhattan used to be water. Collect Pond, a lovely name for a grotesque body of sludge that served as New York's favourite dumping ground in the 1700s. Tanneries and slaughterhouses squatted on the edge of it, bleeding chemicals and filth straight into the water. And when the stench got too overwhelming, the city decided to fix it the way it fixed most things in the 19th century. By pretending it didn't exist, they filled it in, with trash, with earth, with animal remains, anything they could shovel. Then they built right on top of it. No drainage, no proper foundation, just layers of rot. Now, you live on this mess. The ground is soft in the wrong places, buckling under buildings that lean like drunkards. Some tenements sag so badly that doors won't close and floors tilt like carnival funhouses in heavy rain. Raw sewage backs up into basements, turning homes into indoor swamps. Welcome to Real Estate, Slum Edition. You step outside your building and squish onto the street. It's early, barely light, but already loud. Vendors setting up carts, mothers yelling at children, someone getting thrown out of an upstairs window judging by the crash and the colourful language. The city smells different in the morning. Less human waste, more coal smoke, almost pleasant in a gritty, lung-burning sort of way. As you walk, you spot the bones of the old Collect Pond showing through. In some places, the pavement's cracked so badly that dark, muddy water seeps up from beneath. Locals call it swamp breath. Kids dare each other to jump over it. Sometimes they don't make it. Historical fact incoming. Collect Pond wasn't just gross. It used to be beautiful. In the early 1700s, people actually came here to ice skate and picnic. It was deep and clean and fed by natural springs. But by the time the city started growing into an industrial beast, the pond had become a dumping ground, and the dream died with it. And once it was filled in, everything that came after, tenements, streets, churches, even the courthouse, was cursed with unstable land and inevitable decay. The weird part, the pond never really left. Underneath all of 5 Points, water still runs in hidden veins. Basements flood unexpectedly. Crops of mushrooms bloom in people's floorboards. The smell of mould is a permanent houseguest. Quirky fact, a few buildings here have trapdoors that lead straight into what locals call the Black Cellar, a creepy, half-flooded sub-level of unknown origin that may or may not have been a speakeasy, a smuggler's tunnel, or a haphazard sewer bypass. Some say there's a hidden entrance to it under the Old Brewery. Others say if you find it, you'll never come back. So yeah, the geography of the 5 Points isn't just broken. It's haunted by its own bad decisions. You make your way to Paradise Square. The name is laughable. There's no square and definitely no paradise. Just a muddy open area where all the streets converge in a kind of messy hug. You pass a woman dumping a chamber pot straight into the gutter. It splashes. You step wide. Rookie mistake. At the corner, a group of kids, barefoot, shirtless, are playing a game that looks like a cross between stickball and assault. A butcher's cart rolls by, the meat hanging from hooks already attracting flies. A man with a barrel organ grinds out a crooked melody, while a monkey in a vest collects coins. You pass the mission house, a building full of do-gooders trying to save your soul. They offer food, clothes, sometimes even work. But their sermons come with strings. If you want a crust of bread, you'd better sit through an hour of screaming about fire, damnation, and your sinful slum-born nature. You're not in the mood. What you are in the mood for is some kind of steady ground. Not metaphorically, literally. So you make your way to higher ground, which in the 5 points means just less sinking. The buildings here are a touch newer, the sidewalks a little more intact, but the difference is mostly optical illusion. And here's where the scholarly debate kicks in. Did the city planners know this land was doomed? Some say yes, that the people in power intentionally dumped their urban poor onto swampy land no one else wanted. Others argue it was just good old-fashioned incompetence, the same brand that would later build railroads across earthquake zones and stage plays in flammable theatres. Either way, it's hard not to feel like you're standing in someone else's mistake. You walk past the site of the old collect pond itself, or what used to be its shimmering heart. There's nothing to mark it now but a faint dip in the terrain, a low, sad patch of grass trying to grow where the city once bled into the earth. A man beside you mutters, "The land remembers." You glance at him. He's barefoot, grey-bearded, wearing a military jacket 2 sizes too big. He smells like turpentine and cabbage. You nod like you understand and move on. Everyone here's got ghosts. You reach the edge of the neighbourhood where the richer buildings begin, the respectable city. It looks cleaner, brighter, sturdier, but you know better. The rock beneath your feet runs deep, and it doesn't care about city limits. As you turn back toward the slums, you catch sight of a man with a wagon load of bricks and a sour look on his face. He's building something, maybe a wall, maybe a new storefront. Either way, the ground beneath his cart is already cracking. And in your head, you hear it again. The land remembers. If you're born in the 5 points, your life starts with 2 strikes against you, and maybe a third if the midwife's drunk, which to be fair, she usually is. Your first cradle is likely a repurposed potato sack. Your lullaby is the sound of your parents arguing about whether to pawn your boots or your sisters in diapers. Don't get your hopes up. Childhood here doesn't really exist. Not like people imagine it should anyway. There's no school unless you count dodging bricks in the alley as physical education. No bedtime stories, unless the story is don't walk near the docks or someone will drown you for your coat. By the time you can walk, you're expected to work, or at least hustle. You start with errands, hauling buckets of water from the nearest pump, which is usually miles away and more mud than liquid. You sell rags or coal chips, maybe shine boots, or pick pockets. If you're fast enough, no one catches you. If you're not, well, congratulations. You're learning about street justice. The other kids don't exactly feel like friends. They're competition. That rat-faced boy with the missing tooth and fist like stones. That's Seamus. He once knocked out a grown man's kneecap with a brick. The twins with the dead eyes. They run errands for one of the gangs. The little girl with a shaved head and pet chicken. No one's quite sure if she speaks English or any language at all, but she has a knife, and that's enough. Quirky fact. Some of the street gangs here are entirely made up of children. They call themselves names like the Plug Uglies, the Shirt Tails, or the Slaughterhounds. You might laugh, until a dozen of them surround you with bricks and blackjacks. Their loyalty isn't bought with money, but with shared misery and scraps of power. One older boy even tattooed his gang's initials on his arm using a needle, a candle, and some soot. Did he spell it wrong? Absolutely. Did anyone dare tell him? Not if they wanted to keep their teeth. You live in a room with 6, maybe 7 people. Some family, some not. There's one mattress between you all, and it smells like old soup and despair. At night, your parents argue about moving to Brooklyn like that's some magical answer. But they never do. No one really leaves. The 5 points has this way of holding on to you like a fever dream or quicksand. Some kids try to go to the free school set up by reformers, but most drop out within weeks. Education doesn't pay. Not when your stomach's empty. Not when your mum needs you to sell newspapers on the Bowery. Not when you can earn more in a day pickpocketing theatre-goers than you'd earn in a year reading poems about George Washington. You remember the first time you saw a body in the street. You were maybe 5, 6. You were chasing a hoop down Baxter Street when you tripped over a man who looked like he'd fallen asleep. He hadn't. His eyes were open, glassy, and he smelled like whiskey and something worse. No one stopped. Not even you, once you realised he wasn't going to get up. Death here is routine, unremarkable. If anything, it's considered bad manners to die where people are trying to sell fruit. Historical fact. By the 1850s, New York City's mortality rate was among the highest in the country, and kids bore the brunt of it. More than half of all children born in the 5 Points didn't make it to their 10th birthday. Between disease, malnutrition, accidents, and violence, it was a wonder anyone made it to adulthood at all. Sometimes you do find brief pockets of joy. The tenement roof is a good place. Up there, the stink is less pungent, and you can almost see the river. If you squint, the city almost looks like it might be beautiful one day. Kids chase each other between chimneys, and someone always has a harmonica or a tin whistle to fill the air with wobbly music. And for just a moment, you forget. You forget the hunger, the cold, the way your ribs poke through your shirt like scaffolding. You forget that last night, the floor gave out in the building next door and swallowed a family of 4. You forget that you've never seen a doctor who didn't smell like gin. Debate time. Some historians claim the children of the 5 Points were wild, unsocialised, barely human. But others push back, arguing that they were survivors, resilient, clever, and capable of deep loyalty and even joy despite the squalor. What's the truth? Maybe it's both. Maybe you can be a child thief and a loyal friend. Maybe you can dodge the law in the morning and share your crust of bread with a stray dog in the evening. Because that's the thing. This place doesn't kill kindness. It just makes it quieter, smaller, something that has to be protected like a spark in the rain. You learn early who to trust. The old shoemaker who gives you heel scraps to play with. The washerwoman who lets you sleep by the stove when your home's too cold. Even the newsboy who always splits his take with his blind brother, even when business is bad. You also learn who to avoid. The man with the oily moustache who hangs around the docks asking kids if they want easy work. The nurse who sells laudanum-laced syrup to desperate mothers. The landlord who shows up with thugs when rent's overdue, which it always is. And sometimes you wonder what else is out there. Uptown, maybe. Or across the river. You hear stories about places with trees and schools and meals that happen more than once a day, but it sounds like fiction, like something from a penny novel. Real life is down here, in the mud and the smoke and the blood. One evening you curl up under the stairs with a stolen book, a Bible missing its cover and most of Genesis. You can't read all of it, but you like the part about the flood. It feels familiar. A world drowning in sin and stink, waiting for something to wash it clean. But nothing washes clean in the 5 Points. It just gets covered in more layers of grime, more stories, more bones. You drift to sleep that night to the sound of distant shouting, broken glass, and someone playing a sad tune on a fiddle. The city breathes around you, heavy and hot, like it's alive. Morning comes in through a crack in the wall, grey and grimy. The kind of light that doesn't wake you so much as warn you. Time to get moving, before the house itself decides to collapse. You stretch your aching limbs and hit your head on the underside of a bunk that wasn't there yesterday. The room's fuller now. Someone's cousin just came over from Liverpool, or maybe it was Galway. He brought a cough and a tin flute and not much else. There's a baby crying, a pan hissing, and someone arguing about how long you can reuse tea leaves before it's just hot water flavoured with sadness. Welcome to life in the tenements. Rent's due, always. You don't rent a room here. You rent a corner, maybe a mattress if you're lucky. The rest of the space, a shared free-for-all of smells, secrets, and body heat. The air tastes like mildew and boiled cabbage. The windows rattle with every gust of wind, even when they're shut, which, weirdly, they almost never are. You navigate around limbs and laundry to reach the one luxury every floor shares, a single cracked chamber pot. It's full. Of course it's full. You consider tossing it out the window, standard protocol. But it's your turn to take it downstairs and someone's already threatened to break your fingers if you pull the window stunt again fair enough. The hallway outside your door is dark and narrow, lit only by a flickering oil lamp that's hanging on by a thread. The stairs creak like they're filing a complaint with every step. You pass your neighbour, Mrs. Donnelly, who's carrying 2 screaming kids and a suspiciously lumpy pillowcase. Probably laundry. Probably not just laundry. Historical fact of the day. Tenement buildings in the mid-1800s weren't built to code, because there were no codes. Developers packed them as tightly and cheaply as possible. Most lacked plumbing, ventilation, or even reliable walls. Whole families, sometimes multiple, would cram into one-room apartments. One tenement on Mott Street housed over 120 people in just 4 stories, Let that sink in. Or better yet, don't, because the floors here have a history of doing exactly that. You step into the common courtyard out back, a grim little rectangle of dirt and bricks where the community comes together to dump trash, empty chamber pots, beat rugs, and argue over water rights. Some poor soul is trying to clean their child using a bucket and a rag, while a couple of chickens scurry around pecking at God knows what. There's a dog with one eye that everyone pretends isn't theirs but still somehow gets fed. You dump the pot, try not to breathe, fail. Back inside, your building groans like it's considering retirement. On the 3rd floor, a ceiling collapsed last week. On the 2nd floor, a boarder died and wasn't discovered for 3 days. On the 4th floor, a woman gave birth while everyone else was watching a cockfight in the alley. Your mattress, if you can call it that, is a flattened sack stuffed with rags and possibly fleas. The blanket smells like soup and sorrow. You try to keep your shoes on even when you sleep because someone will swipe them otherwise. People steal shoes, yes, even terrible ones. You've seen worse. A man in the next building lost an eye in a fight over a crust of bread. Quirky fact time. Many of the tenements were once single-family homes, small houses converted into multifamily units. Over the decades, walls were knocked out, floors added, and closets turned into bedrooms. In one recorded case, a landlord converted a former coat closet into a studio that housed 3 men and a dog. Rent was paid weekly and in pennies. You get your breakfast from a street vendor, a slice of bread and something the guy swears is bacon, but tastes more like regret. You eat it fast because there's nowhere to sit, and you're already late for whatever it is you're doing today, assuming you have a job or a scam, or a favour owed. There's always something to chase, if not for money, then just to stay moving. Down the block, someone's throwing water out of a 2nd-story window. You dodge it instinctively. It's not always just water. You pass another tenement being torn down. It's leaning at a dangerous angle, half of it already gutted. Kids dart in and out of the rubble laughing. A woman stands nearby, shouting about how she lived there for 10 years. No one's listening. No one ever does. Debate time. Some scholars argue the tenement experience created a unique kind of social resilience, neighbours forming tight-knit communities in the face of shared suffering. Others say it destroyed families, eroded health, and made upward mobility nearly impossible. Honestly, both are true. You learn to survive with people, but survival becomes the entire goal. Thriving. That's someone else's problem. You swing by the mission house for a cup of weak coffee. The woman behind the table smiles at you like she's doing God's work. Maybe she is. Maybe she just likes the feeling of being better off than you. Either way, you take the coffee, and this tiny cup of bitterness is the high point of your morning. You head back home because it's laundry day. The hallway now smells like vinegar and wet wool. Every available surface is draped in drying clothes. Shirts, drawers, petticoats, even socks stiff as boards. You find your own rag of a shirt among the tangle and consider whether it's dry or just less wet. On your way back to your corner of the room, you spot your little brother, barefoot, nose running, face smudged with coal dust. He's teaching himself to whistle. You smile in spite of yourself. Then he wipes his nose with your sleeve and runs off. Moment over. Later you lie down on your not-quite mattress and stare at the ceiling, counting the cracks. You wonder what it would feel like to live in a real house, one with doors that close, with water that comes from a pipe and not a pump 2 blocks away. You heard a rumour someone in uptown Manhattan has a flush toilet. A toilet. You try to imagine it, but it's like picturing the moon. The day winds down, the walls are so thin you hear the people next door arguing in Polish, followed by a lullaby in Italian, followed by someone retching. Probably the bacon. You close your eyes to the sound of boots on the stairs, someone singing off-key, and the building creaking like it's bracing for impact. Because here, even when you sleep, the slum doesn't. It starts with the sound of boots, heavy ones, moving fast. You're not the only one who hears them. On your floor, people go quiet. A baby stops crying mid-wail, as if it knows something's about to happen. You sit up, pulse quickening. Boots mean trouble. And in the 5 points, trouble doesn't knock. It kicks the door in. You slip to the cracked window and peek down into the street. There they are. 10 of them, maybe more, marching in formation like soldiers, but fancier top hats. Coats too clean for this neighbourhood. They've got slick hair, polished shoes, and faces that don't flinch when someone hurls a bucket of slop into the gutter. The Bowery Boys are out. They walk like they own the place, even though they hate everything about it. They're not from here. They're nativists, proud Americans who think the whole city's gone to hell because of the Irish, the Germans, the Italians, the everyone not them. And if they happen to stroll through 5 Points with bats and billy clubs, well, that's just local politics. You head down the stairs slowly. You want a better look, but not close enough to catch a brick in the face. On the way, you pass a group of men huddled near the stairwell, murmuring about payback. One of them is chewing on a matchstick like it's a challenge to the world. You recognise him, Tim Malloy, Dead Rabbits, not someone you want to owe money to or beer, or anything. You make it to the stoop just in time to watch the Bowery Boys swagger past Paradise Square, shouting slurs and pounding their sticks on fences. They chant about real Americans and taking back the streets. No one takes them seriously, until they start breaking windows. Historical fact drop. The Bowery Boys were real, and they were terrifying. They weren't just street punks. They were organised, politically connected, and deeply embedded in the power structures of the city. Many of them worked as firemen, using their positions to swing bats in elections at the same time. They saw themselves as protectors of American values, but mostly they just like to fight. You spot their leader, or one of them, a tall guy with a waxed moustache and a bright red waistcoat. He twirls a baton like he's performing in some bloody ballet. A few locals shout back at them, and for a moment it feels like a powder keg is ready to blow. Then the first rock flies. You don't see who throws it, but it lands hard, bouncing off a Bowery Boy's head. He staggers, shouts, then rushes the tenement. The rest follow. Now it's chaos. People scatter. Women scream. Kids run. Someone tosses a pot of boiling water from a window and misses completely, hitting an old man selling apples. The Bowery Boys crash through the street like a wave, swinging clubs, cracking ribs. A group of dead rabbits charge in from the alley, and now it's a full brawl. 20 men in a swirling knot of fists, sticks and curses. You duck behind a cart, heart thudding, as a bottle shatters inches from your face. Over the din, someone shouts, "Get the fire company!" Yeah, that's a thing now. You hear the rumble of wheels, the clang of a bell, and then the real gang arrives. Engine Company number 6. Supposedly a fire brigade, they're dressed more like a gang of circus strongmen, red suspenders, rolled up sleeves, brass nozzles slung like rifles. They're here not to stop a fire, there is no fire, but because one of them heard the Bowery Boys were getting frisky. They pile off the wagon and wade into the fight like it's a church picnic. Fists fly, a dead rabbit goes down, a Bowery Boy gets slammed into a lamppost. The firemen cheer and start throwing punches indiscriminately. Quirky fact: fire companies in 19th century New York were often more like gangs with water access than emergency responders. Rival brigades would race each other to fires, not to save lives, but to earn rewards or beat the competition, and if they ran into a rival on the way, the fire could wait. First, a fist fight. You pull back into the shadows and head around the block. Too dangerous up front. But you want to see how this ends, and curiosity always beats common sense in the points. By the time you circle back, the police have arrived. Sort of. A handful of officers, wearing ridiculous tall hats and confused expressions, try to assert control. One of them blows a whistle, which is ignored by everyone except a nearby goat. Another tries to separate two men locked in a headlock by tapping them with a stick. One of the Bowery Boys laughs in his face and keeps punching. Eventually the cops start swinging harder, but by then, most of the crowd has already fled. The fight breaks up, more from exhaustion than law enforcement. Blood stains the cobblestones. A hat lies crumpled near a gutter, its owner nowhere in sight. Someone's moaning, possibly from under a wagon. Debate time. Were the Bowery Boys actual defenders of their neighbourhood, or just glorified thugs with a patriotic complex? Scholars can't quite agree. Some say they were a reaction to waves of immigration, trying to maintain order and identity. Others argue they were nothing but political enforcers for corrupt elites. Either way, they were dangerous, loud, and always looking for a fight. As the dust settles, you notice a strange thing. Someone's playing a fiddle again. A slow, lilting tune floats over the wreckage like a sigh. Life in the 5 Points doesn't pause. It limps forward, bruised but stubborn. A woman helps her husband to his feet. A kid starts collecting dropped coins from the fight. One of the firemen lights a cigar with shaking hands and sits on the curb like he's waiting for a parade. You return home, passing a wall that now has a new bloodstain on it, like a signature. Inside, your building is buzzing. Everyone's talking. Did you see the hit that guy took? Who threw the first punch? Are they coming back tomorrow? Probably. They always do. You curl up in your corner and listen as your neighbour tries to wash the blood out of his shirt. He's humming under his breath. You don't recognise the tune, but you recognise the mood. It's just another day. Just another visit from the Bowery Boys. You wake to the sound of someone screaming in Gaelic. It's not even dawn yet, but downstairs, in the alley behind the building, someone's furious, slurring through a combination of Irish and punches you throw on your shirt, still damp from yesterday's rain, and creep to the window. You've learned to tell the difference between a regular fight and a Dead Rabbits fight. This one's the latter. 3 men in ragged coats are stomping another man who's curled up like a sack of bones and teeth. The attackers wear red stripes tied around their hats or arms, scraps of ribbon, faded but unmistakable. That's their mark. That and their reputation. You've seen the Bowery Boys, sure, but if they're all polish and patriotic rage, the Dead Rabbits are something rawer, dirtier, and far more terrifying when you're on the wrong side of them. They're the unofficial kings of the 5 points, and unofficial is the only kind of king that works here. The attackers finish their business and scatter into the fog before the police can pretend to care. You head outside once the moaning stops. The man they beat is still breathing. Barely. Someone flips him over, recognises his face, and mutters a word you won't repeat. Wrong neighbourhood, wrong side, right beating. You learn quick around here. Know your colours, keep your head down, and never ever walk through Paradise Square wearing the wrong scrap of cloth. Historical fact. The Dead Rabbits weren't a joke. Despite the name, yeah, we'll get to that, they were one of the most violent and dominant gangs in mid-1800s. Manhattan made up mostly of Irish immigrants and Irish Americans. They fought vicious turf wars with nativist groups like the Bowery Boys. The infamous 5 Points riot of 1857, that was Dead Rabbits versus Bowery Boys. Dozens dead, streets torn apart. And yes, people did actually wear dead rabbits on sticks as battle flags. That's your quirky fact, by the way. The gang name supposedly came from a dead rabbit being thrown into a meeting hall during a fight. Instead of being insulted, the group took it as a symbol of ferocity and absurdity. Some say they'd carry dead rabbits impaled on poles into battle, because nothing says intimidation like wielding decomposing rodents. The debate still rolls on, though. Were the Dead Rabbits truly organised, or just a loose group of angry men with nothing to lose? Some historians claim they were a functioning street army with ranks, signals, and even meeting halls. Others argue they were more like a violent mob that banded together when convenient, then drifted back into tenement life when the bruises faded. You don't care much for scholarly analysis when you're stepping over a tooth in the street. You head to Baxter Street, where some of the rabbits gather on the regular. It's early, but a few are already loitering outside McGowan's gin mill. You keep your distance. One nods at you. You nod back, carefully, just enough to show respect, not weakness. One of them, a wiry man with copper hair and knuckles like gravel, is telling a story about how he bit a Bowery Boy's ear off during a brawl. He says it with the same tone a man might use to brag about fishing. The others laugh, slap him on the back and sip from a shared bottle. He locks eyes with you. What are you looking at? You look away. Fast. You slip around the corner and duck into the butcher's alley, where the rabbits don't go unless they're collecting dues. The butcher himself gives you a nod and tosses you a small heel of bread. It's stale, but free. That's rare kindness in this neighbourhood, and you make a mental note to return the favour someday. Maybe warn him next time the gang's planning a sweep. Because that's how it works. The rabbits don't just fight, they collect. Protection money, they call it. But if you don't pay, protection becomes destruction real fast, a smashed window, a lost child, a fire that starts without reason. They also control most of the local crime. You want to run a numbers game? Talk to the rabbits. Want to smuggle whiskey? Rabbits. Want to sell anything more illicit than apples? They get a cut, or you get cut. But they're not just thugs. They're the local power structure. They settle disputes. They organise strikes. They even fund weddings. If it suits them, some people admire them. Others fear them. Most do both. The church bells ring in the distance, maybe announcing a funeral, maybe just marking the hour. In the 5 Points, both usually happen at the same time. You pass a wall plastered with handbills, Tammany Hall meetings, boxing matches, a missing child who no one will find. You remember the old rumour that some of the rabbits were trained in street combat by veterans of the Irish Rebellion. True or not, the way they fight suggests more than just street smarts. They're precise, brutal, efficient, not brawlers, battlers. You turn a corner and nearly trip over two kids playing with sticks like they're swords. They shout gang names at each other. I'm a rabbit. I'm a Bowery boy. They pretend to stab each other and then fall dramatically into the mud. One starts laughing so hard he swallows a mouthful of street sludge. You help him up and wipe his face off with your sleeve. It's disgusting. You both laugh. A moment later, a rabbit strolls by and ruffles the kid's hair. That's right, he says. Start 'em young. You look away again. Later that day, you find yourself at a street corner where an older rabbit is standing on a crate, shouting about the rights of the Irish, about American hypocrisy, about poverty and justice and vengeance. It sounds almost noble, almost. But then he says something about the Bowery Boys' mothers that makes even the children wince. Debate flares up again in your mind. Were the rabbits freedom fighters, resisting oppression from the nativists and the corrupt elite? Or just violent opportunists playing Robin Hood to excuse robbery? History doesn't agree, and neither do your neighbours. You head back home before the sun dips too low. It's safer that way. The streets get wilder at night, and the rabbits like their evenings messy. But just before you reach your stoop, you hear singing from the alley behind the gin mill, a chorus of rough voices slightly off-key, belting out a war tune about old Ireland and crooked teeth. You pause, just for a second, because for all their blood and bluster, the dead rabbits sing like men who've lost things. Maybe that's what makes them so dangerous. If you ever get lost in the 5 points, and let's be real, you will, there's one building that's easy to find. Not because it's beautiful or towering or especially well marked. No, you'll find it because people whisper about it, avoid walking too close to it, and refer to it only as the brewery. You approach it now, drawn in by some mixture of fear and morbid curiosity. The building slumps against its neighbours like it's had too much to drink. Fitting, considering its name. Once upon a time, it was an actual brewery, pumping out beer for early New Yorkers. But after the business collapsed, the building mutated into something far worse. A slum within a slum, a vertical maze of broken staircases, rotting wood, and human misery stacked 5 floors deep. They call it the Old Brewery, and yeah, it's every bit as cheerful as it sounds. You step inside and the smell hits you immediately. It's like the ghost of every bad decision ever made. Sour sweat, cheap liquor, unwashed flesh, and something metallic you really hope isn't blood. The air's damp, heavy, close. Even the rats move cautiously in here, like they know better than to get too comfortable. Inside, it's darker than it should be. The windows are so caked with grime they barely let in the sunlight. Hallways stretch out like intestines, narrow, winding, disorienting, and everywhere. People, sleeping, shouting, gambling, begging. You pass a woman rocking a child with one hand and holding a knife in the other. A man with a missing eye laughs too hard at something no one said. A group of children squat in a corner, drawing in the dust with fingers that look like twigs. Historical fact. By the 1850s, the Old Brewery was home to over 1,000 people, crammed into makeshift rooms built from scrap wood and desperation. It had no plumbing, no heat, and no real structure. Just people, stacked like cordwood, living in the shell of a building that had outlived its original purpose and become a monument to survival. You pass a doorway covered with rags. Inside, someone's playing a harmonica. It's a haunting tune, slow and low, like a dirge for the building itself. Every note seems to bounce off the walls, echoing through the endless maze of humanity. Quirky fact. The building was so infamous that even tourists came to see it. That's right. Wealthy uptown New Yorkers would hire guides to lead them through the brewery, like it was some kind of grim safari. Observe the slum dwellers in their natural habitat, they'd say, clutching their scented handkerchiefs. The people living there hated it, but money's money, and if some fool wanted to pay to watch you eat rat stew with your fingers, so be it. There's an unspoken rule inside the brewery. Keep your eyes down, your voice low, and your hands to yourself. You walk like you're invisible, which isn't hard. Most people are too busy with their own pain to notice you. Eventually you reach the centre of the building, the large common area that used to be the brewery floor. The vats are long gone, but the space is still wide, open, echoing. And in the middle of it, a brawl. No surprise there. 2 men are fighting shirtless, bare knuckle, surrounded by a crowd that smells of sweat and whiskey. Bets are being shouted, coins are being passed. The fighters punch like it's personal. One goes down, hard. Someone cheers. Someone else spits. Another fight starts 2 feet away. This one's between 2 women shrieking in 3 languages and swinging like windmills. You don't stop to watch. You keep moving. You reach the back of the building where things get even worse. The rooms here aren't really rooms, just spaces divided by hanging cloth or scavenged boards. You hear coughing, deep, wet, awful, and pass a door where someone's whispering prayers in Spanish. There's an entire family crammed into a corner trying to cook a fish over a candle. The fish isn't winning. Debate time. Was the Old Brewery the most dangerous building in America, or just the most infamous? Some historians say it was exaggerated by reformers looking to stir public sympathy. Others argue the truth was worse than any pamphlet could describe. Regardless, one thing's clear. This place wasn't just a slum. It was the slum, the one that haunted newspapers, sermons and nightmares alike. A door slams. You jump. A man walks past with blood on his shirt and no shoes. You don't ask questions. In the stairwell, you meet a woman named Biddy. She's old, wiry, and has the kind of face that looks like it's been in a long-term relationship with misery. She's sweeping the steps with a broom that's more handle than bristle. "You don't live here, do you?" she asks. "No," you say. "Good," she grunts. "Means you might live a little longer." You nod. Say nothing, and keep climbing. On the top floor, what's left of it, you reach a window that sort of opens. You breathe in the outside air. It's filthy, sure, but it's less filthy, and that's enough. You can see the 5 points from up here, stretched out in all its grimy, glorious decay. Roofs patched with tin, laundry flapping like surrender flags, smoke rising from chimneys, from barrels, from accidents. And down below, a fresh fight starting outside the gin mill, of course. As you descend, you pass a child asleep in a crate. She's maybe 4, clutching a doll made from rags and string. Her cheeks are hollow, but she's smiling in her sleep. That gets you more than the blood did. You leave quietly, past the same doors, the same stairs. The harmonica is still playing, and you catch the melody this time. It's an old Irish tune, something about longing for home. But for a lot of people here, this is home, the Old Brewery, the crooked heart of the 5 points. A building that should have fallen years ago, but somehow, like everyone inside it, just keeps standing. If you're going to survive in the 5 points for more than a week, you'd better understand one crucial rule. Fists settle politics here. You hear about it before you see it. Cheering, clapping, the occasional thud of flesh on flesh. Someone yells, "A nickel on the redhead." Someone else responds with, "10 on the butcher." So of course, being who you are, curious to the point of reckless, you follow the noise. You end up behind a barber shop where the rear courtyard has been turned into a makeshift fight ring. It's just a circle of barrels and crates with men and boys pressed in tight, shouting, sweating, gambling, and in the centre, 2 fighters stripped to the waist, bare-knuckled, soaked in sweat and blood, dancing around each other with the kind of grace that says they've been doing this since they were old enough to throw rocks. One of them's got shoulders like tree trunks and a jaw you could hang laundry on. The other's wiry, fast, with eyes that don't blink. They trade blows that echo against the walls. It's not a brawl, it's a performance. Precise, vicious, beautiful in the way a thunderstorm is beautiful if you're under a tin roof. A man next to you is shouting odds while collecting bets in a bowler hat. He's missing 3 fingers but counting just fine. This isn't just entertainment, it's politics, social structure, street law. These fights? They're backed by political clubs, groups that run the neighbourhood behind the scenes, greasing palms, swinging elections, and when necessary settling disputes with fists instead of ballots. Historical fact. In mid-19th century New York, political clubs weren't just campaign offices. They were semi-legal operations that ran the city's underworld. One of the most infamous was Tammany Hall, a democratic political machine that traded favours for votes, handed out jobs like candy, and made kings out of thugs. And when words failed, that's when the clubs called in the fighters. You learn quickly that almost every decent fighter in the slums is connected to one club or another. They're persuaders. Got a rival club pushing into your turf, put your man in the ring, winner gets the claim, or the contract, or the beer concession for a city block. And here's your quirky fact of the night. Some fighters were so tied to politics, they'd wear the club's colours in the ring, like living campaign posters. One guy even had the face of a local councilman tattooed on his back. That's loyalty, or insanity. Often the same thing down here. The match ends with the wiry guy catching the brawler square in the throat, a punch so fast you almost don't see it. The crowd gasps, then erupts. Coins fly. The bookie grins with 2 gold teeth and 3 fake ones. The loser coughs blood onto the dirt and laughs like he expected it. You head toward the alley as another pair of fighters steps up. But before you get too far, someone grabs your arm. "Hey," he says, "you look like you could throw a punch." You turn. The man's wearing a cheap waistcoat and a politician's grin. His hair is slicked back so hard it could stop bullets, and his shoes are just a little too nice for someone standing in a puddle of what may or may not be blood. "Name's Corcoran," he says. "I run a club over on Pearl Street. We're always looking for muscle. You know, civic engagement." You tell him you're not interested. "Everyone's interested," he says. "Eventually." You walk away, because here's the truth. Once you get tied to a political club, it's like selling your soul to the city. Sure, they'll feed you, maybe even protect you, but you fight when they say fight, vote when they say vote, and keep your mouth shut the rest of the time. Loyalty is everything, and disloyalty? That gets you a one-way trip to the East River with your boots filled with bricks. You make your way through the Bowery as the afternoon sun slants through the alleyways, catching glints of broken glass and golden promises. A rally's just ended, and boys in paper hats are tossing flyers into the wind. One of them hands you a pamphlet covered in typos and sweat. "Join the cause, vote for change." You don't even read it. Change isn't something that happens here. It's something people shout about until the next fight breaks their jaw. Debate time. Some historians argue that these political clubs were a form of early community organising. They provided jobs, food, protection, at a time when the government wasn't doing much of anything. Others say they were parasites, exploiting the desperate and fueling cycles of corruption and violence. And the fighters, were they pawns or players? Depends who you ask, and whether they're still breathing. Later you sit on the stoop of a tenement and watch a group of kids trying to imitate the fighters they saw earlier. They've drawn a chalk ring in the dirt and are swinging wildly at each other. No technique, no strategy, just fists and giggles. One of them lands a decent punch and yells, "That's for Tammany." No one knows what that means, but it sounds impressive. A man passing by grunts. "Start 'em young," he mutters. You lean back, close your eyes, and listen to the sounds of the slum. The thud of fists, the clink of coins, the shouts of bookies and barkers and believers. Out here, violence isn't random, it's regulated, it's ritual. It's part of the machinery that keeps this whole rotten city moving forward one punch at a time. You open your eyes as the sun dips low. A fresh fighter steps into the ring. The crowd roars. Somewhere down the street someone loses a bet and screams about fraud. A brawl breaks out. Again. And you think to yourself, in this city democracy bleeds. You're not even halfway down the block before the smoke hits you. Thick, acrid and rising fast, twisting up between buildings like it's got somewhere better to be. You squint toward the horizon and see the glow before you hear the panic. Not just a fire, a bad one. And in the 5 points, bad doesn't just mean property damage, it means riot. You don't need directions, you follow the crowd. By the time you reach the corner of Baxter and Bayard, it's full chaos. A building's burning, second floor fully lit up, flames licking out the windows like they're hungry for more. People are screaming, grabbing buckets, forming lines. Someone's hanging out a third-story window wailing for help. But what catches your eye isn't the fire, it's the mob. They're not fighting the flames, they're fueling them. You realise it's not just a random building going up, it's a business, a draft office. Welcome to the 1863 New York City draft riots. It's not a good night to be wearing a government uniform. Historical fact. In July of 1863, after the federal government instituted a military draft to bolster Union forces in the Civil War, working-class New Yorkers, especially Irish immigrants, erupted in protest. It started with frustration over the $300 commutation fee, which allowed wealthier men to buy their way out of service. For the poor, $300 might as well have been $3 million. The draft was seen as a death sentence for the poor and a loophole for the rich. Resentment turned to rage, and then the rage caught fire. Literally, you duck behind a wagon as a man rushes by with a torch and a grin that should worry everyone. His shirt's unbuttoned, his knuckles scraped. Someone shouts behind him, "To the armory!" There's no real organisation to the riot, at least not yet, just fury. It rolls through the streets like thunder, picking up people and purpose as it goes. You run with it, swept up despite yourself. The mob turns a corner and heads toward another draft office. The windows are already smashed, and smoke's pouring out the top floor. Women are screaming at the soldiers trying to hold the door. One of them gets pulled down into the crowd. His uniform vanishes in a storm of fists and boots. You want to stop. You want to help. But then you see who's really in danger. Black families are fleeing, running from their own neighbourhoods, clutching whatever they can carry. The mob has started targeting them too. Rage over the draft has warped into something uglier, more poisonous. Rumours swirl that the war's only being fought to free enslaved people, and now that anger's spilling into open hatred. A side street explodes in screams. You duck behind a water barrel as a group of men drag a black man into the street. He's pleading. They don't care. It turns your stomach. You look away, because if you don't, you'll be next. Debate time. Some historians argue the draft riots were a tragic but inevitable response to systemic inequality, an eruption from the working class who felt cornered by a war they didn't understand, and a system that always seemed to bleed them dry. Others insist that once the violence turned racial, the riots became indefensible, an atrocity fueled by ignorance and hate. Either way, by the end of 4 days, over 100 people were dead, entire neighbourhoods were ashes, and the city would never be the same. You flee down an alley and nearly run into a fire company, Engine 33, hauling their wagon with 6 sweating men and a mule that looks like it's seen better centuries, but they're not rushing to help. They're laughing. Firemen during the riots? Many joined in. Some were members of political clubs or gangs, and they brought their rivalries with them to the flames. In one case, 2 companies started fighting each other in front of a burning orphanage. The building burned to the ground while the men fought in the mud. Quirky fact: one of the most infamous buildings destroyed during the riots was the Coloured Orphan Asylum on 5th Avenue. It was torched on the second day, despite the desperate efforts of its staff to protect the children. Amazingly, most of the kids escaped thanks to the bravery of a few volunteers, but the building was lost, and the event still stands as one of the most heartbreaking chapters of the riots. As the fires burn hotter and the screams grow louder, you find shelter in the cellar of a butcher shop. A few others are hiding down there. Old men, weeping women, one boy holding a Bible like it might work as armour. No one speaks. You all just listen to the violence above like it's a thunderstorm that might decide to come through the roof. You sit in the dark, heart pounding, wondering if the riots will reach your building, your street, your family, your life. Because now you understand, the 5 Points isn't just a rough neighbourhood, it's a powder keg, always has been. The slum is just the surface beneath it. Anger, pain, and fear press in from all directions. Tonight, it just happened to explode. Hours later, you emerge from the cellar. The fires are dying, the mobs are scattered, the air is heavy with smoke and loss. You walk home in silence, stepping over debris, broken glass, and what might be a piece of someone's hat or scalp. You don't look too closely. Outside your building, a woman is scrubbing blood off her doorstep. She doesn't stop when you pass, just nods. And for once, the slum is quiet. But you know better. It's not peace. It's just the eye of the storm. Some people say women in the 5 Points are invisible. Clearly those people have never been stabbed by one. You learn fast in these streets. Ignore the corsets and bonnets, the babies on hips and laundry lines flapping in the breeze. Behind the petticoats and polite words are some of the toughest, sharpest and most unforgiving survivors in the entire city. You see it for yourself one afternoon in Paradise Square. A scuffle breaks out, nothing unusual, and suddenly this woman, probably no taller than your shoulder and built like a willow, pulls a blade from her boot and slashes a man's arm before he even finishes his insult one clean cut. Blood spills, the man reels, and the crowd just shrugs and keeps walking. Standard Tuesday. Historical fact. Women in the 5 Points weren't just passive victims of poverty, they were active participants in its survival economy. They ran boarding houses, bootleg liquor joints, brothels, and illegal gambling dens. They also pickpocketed, smuggled, forged papers, and ran protection schemes. If a man was running the front, odds were good. There was a woman managing everything from the shadows. You pass by one such woman now, Big Mary Larkin. Everyone calls her Big Mary, not because of her size, though she could probably bench press a goat, but because she's got big pull. She runs a guest house on Worth Street, which is to say, a brothel with a soup kitchen side hustle. You step into her parlour once looking for a friend and nearly get knocked out by the smell of onions and perfume. She runs the place like a general. 5 girls under her roof, 2 bouncers at the door, and an open tab with the local police captain. whom she refers to only as Sweetie. If there's a power hierarchy in the points, Mary Larkin is in the upper echelons, and you never cross her. Crossing Mary, someone once told you, is like punching a bear and expecting a hug. You believe it. Then there's Sadie Flynn, a midwife and fixer who charges in whiskey or firewood, depending on your need. You've seen her patch up bullet wounds with one hand while spoon-feeding porridge to a newborn with the other. She's got a scar across her jaw and eyes like a storm cloud. The police don't mess with her. The gangs leave her alone, and the only time she ever raised her voice, 3 men left the room and never came back. Quirky fact, some women in the points carried knives in their hair, not for show, not for protection, just in case they needed to settle a score or cut someone loose from a bad situation, be it a fight, a corset, or a husband. One woman was known to pull a stiletto from her garter during dinner and carve her initials into the table, while making direct eye contact with a local gang boss. She got the job. There are also the high flyers, ladies of the evening who work the better brothels, if such a thing exists in the points. They dress better, speak softer, and usually have a sponsor, a politician, a businessman, or a gang captain. They're less likely to get stabbed, but more likely to disappear when their usefulness runs out. You met one once. She said she used to be a teacher. You didn't ask what happened. Then there are the mothers, the ones juggling 5 children, 2 jobs, and no husband in sight. They know where to find the best bread on Monday, and how to sew a pair of boots together from scrap leather and spit. You've seen one throw a full bucket of water at a drunk trying to break into her window. Then she screamed at her kids to finish their soup while hurling a brick at the man as he ran off. Soup never stopped steaming. Debate time. Were women in the 5 points empowered by the lawlessness around them, or just more desperate than anyone dared admit? Historians argue both sides. Some say the lack of formal structure gave them unusual freedom, to own businesses, carry weapons, and live outside societal norms. Others say their freedom was just another form of captivity, fighting for scraps in a system that still used and discarded them. But try telling that to the woman down the block who just chased off 2 loan sharks with a cast-iron frying pan. One afternoon, you walk past a laundry line and hear 2 women gossiping in Irish-accented English about the new copper patrolling the block. One of them says, "I'll give him a week before he learns who's really in charge." The other just laughs and spits into a bucket. Later that night, you see the same officer talking to Big Mary on the stoop. He's got his hat in his hands and a sheepish look on his face. She's smiling, but not in a nice way. You wonder what he did. And then there are the girls. You pass a pair of them playing hopscotch near a puddle that smells vaguely of gin and cabbage. One of them has a sling around her arm and a face that says, "Don't you dare ask about it." The other's carrying a kitten in her apron and a slingshot tucked into her waistband. The game is brutal. Chalk lines, shoves, accusations of cheating. But when a boy twice their size tries to cut in line, they run him off like wolves guarding the last bone. You smile, can't help it. You grew up around girls like this. They don't cry, they curse, they don't ask for help, they give orders, and if you mess with them, they will bury you behind the brewery and still make it home for supper. Back in your building, you hear footsteps on the stairs, heavy boots but not a man's tread. It's Mrs. Keating from the 4th floor, returning from work with a sack of potatoes over her shoulder and a dead chicken in one hand her husband left last year. Rumour is she chased him down the block and hit him with a shovel before he made it to the docks. She nods at you as she passes. You nod back. There's no ceremony to strength here, no spotlight for survival. Women don't strut or brag or bluster. They endure. They build the routines that keep people alive. They nurse the sick, boil the water, bandage the wounds. They protect the children, they settle scores. They speak in codes, in warnings, in glances. And sometimes, just sometimes, they smile. But it's never for free. You wake up to shouting. Again. It's coming from outside, echoing between the buildings in sharp bursts. Go back to where you came from. This is our city. No papists, no foreigners. You throw on your coat, still damp from yesterday's rain, and step outside. What you see confirms your worst guess. Another street rally. Another wall of angry men, waving American flags with one hand and bricks with the other. You know the drill. Nativists. The Order of the Star-Spangled Banner, or, as most folks call them, the Know-Nothings. Their motto? America for Americans. Which sounds fine, until you realise their definition of American means white, Protestant, and ideally, born within spitting distance of Boston Harbour. The crowd is squaring off with a group of Irish labourers. Some still in work clothes, others in Sunday coats. Tensions are high, voices higher. Someone throws a rock. Not even a good one. Just enough to get the brawl started. Welcome to one of the ugliest truths of the 5 points. It's not just poverty and violence that make it dangerous. It's the hate. The layers of it. Nativist rage. Anti-Irish bigotry. Religious tension. Even within immigrant communities there's infighting. Irish versus German, Catholic versus Protestant. Old arrivals versus new. Historical fact. The Know-Nothings were a real political force in the 1850s, built on fear, anger, and whiskey. They hated immigrants, especially Irish Catholics, and believed America was being overrun by people too poor, too foreign, and too papist to be trustworthy. Their name came from their habit of claiming ignorance. I know nothing, when asked about their secret meetings. Very mysterious, very punchable. You slide into a shadowed doorway as fists start flying. One man's yelling about the Pope taking over New York. Another's shouting back about starving children and railroad jobs. It's all fire and spit until someone pulls a pistol. The crowd scatters like pigeons. You don't wait to see who gets shot. You head south toward Canal Street, where the shouting's more retail than racist. Debate time. Was the anti-Irish hysteria just about religion? Some scholars say yes. Catholicism was viewed as un-American, incompatible with democracy. Others argue it was economic panic disguised as religious outrage. The Irish were flooding the labour market, working for scraps and threatening the jobs of the already struggling poor. So of course someone had to be the scapegoat. But if you're Irish in this city, especially in the 5 points, every day is a reminder that you're considered both too much and not enough. Quirky fact. Some Protestant groups believed Irish immigrants were secretly digging tunnels beneath the city to connect their churches and prepare for a papal invasion. That's not a joke. They really believed the Pope had an army stashed in the basement of St. Patrick's Cathedral, just waiting to pop out and turn the US into Vatican West. You swing by St. Mary's Church, one of the Irish strongholds in the neighbourhood. It's scarred with graffiti again, more No Papists slogans, and something about Irish apes go home. You've seen worse last month. Someone tried to burn the rectory. The priest put it out himself with a pail and a prayer. Inside it's quiet, cool, candlelit. You sit in a pew for a moment just to breathe. You remember being told once that the Irish brought the slums with them, that the 5 points got worse because they arrived. But that's a lie. The slums were already here. Rotting, overcrowded, cruel. The Irish just showed up desperate enough to survive in them. Back on the street, you pass two boys in a tug-of-war over a newspaper. The headline blares, "Catholic mob attacks native sons." You don't need to read the article to know it's mostly fiction. That's the other layer of hate here, the media. The papers stir the pot with wild stories about Irish gangs stealing babies, drunken mothers selling their children, priests running secret death squads, all exaggerated, some invented, but once it's in print it becomes gospel. You wander toward Mulberry Bend, where the divide between American and immigrant isn't marked by a fence or a wall, but by the direction of the glares. You see it in the body language, the flinching, the hesitation when someone opens a shop door and sees a name they can't pronounce. You stop at a tavern for water, well, gin, but it's the cleanest thing on tap. Inside, half the patrons are talking politics, the other half are trying to ignore them. You catch pieces of a rant from a man in a clean suit. They take our jobs, breed like rabbits. No respect for law or order. A woman near you mutters, says the guy who owes rent and punched his brother-in-law last week. You smirk into your glass. Outside again, things seem quieter, for now. But the tension never really leaves. It's in the glances, the gossip, the votes. Oh yes, because this is also about power. The Irish vote, in numbers, and politicians notice. That's why you'll find Tammany Hall glad-handing poor immigrants one day, and denouncing them in the press the next. Everyone's playing both sides. The game is rigged. The board is bloody. But the Irish aren't just victims here. They organise, they fight back, they form their own clubs, build their own schools, start newspapers of their own, they marry into power, claim positions in police and fire departments, and one day, they'll even run this whole city. But that's a long way off. For now, you head back home. You pass a group of German men arguing over sausages, a Polish woman sweeping her stoop, an Italian kid lighting a firecracker in a trash can. The city grows more diverse every year, and with it the fear grows too. Fear of change, fear of the other, Fear of losing power. You don't blame the immigrants for the slums. You blame the city, the systems, the institutions that let neighbourhoods rot while the upper classes sip brandy and debate morals. Still, you can't fix it. Not tonight. Not with another riot around the corner. So you light a candle, say nothing, keep walking. And when someone spits mick at your feet as you pass, you don't flinch. You just smile, real slow. Because if they think you're weak, they haven't been paying attention. The thing about the 5 points is that the cops are always late, and usually the ones getting beat up. You learn early not to expect much from law enforcement. Most of them are fresh off the boat themselves, barely trained and wildly outnumbered. The rest are corrupt, exhausted, or just here for the uniform and the bribes. But technically, yes, the city does have a police force. It's just complicated. You're walking along Centre Street when you hear the sharp blast of a whistle, followed by a chorus of shouting. A familiar sound. Somewhere a pickpocket's been caught, or a drunken brawl spilled into the wrong storefront, or someone forgot to pay their don't get raided fee to the local captain. You follow the noise to a crowd gathering around 2 officers trying to wrestle a suspect into submission. The officers are sweating, shouting, and not doing particularly well. The man they're arresting is twice their size and half as sober. Eventually someone from the crowd steps in, not to help but to laugh louder. This is policing in the 5 points. The beat cops walk their routes with sticks, whistles, and barely any backup. They wear tall, ridiculous hats and carry themselves like they're actors in a play no one respects. Most of them last about as long as a loaf of bread left on a windowsill. Historical fact. In the 1840s and 50s, New York's police force was still figuring itself out. It wasn't centralised, it wasn't standardised, and it definitely wasn't respected. Officers were often political appointees with little to no training. Some didn't even have uniforms until the city decided the chaos was starting to look bad, and for a while, the 5 points was basically its own country, where the law came in second to the street. Quirky fact. At one point there were 2 competing police forces in New York City, the municipal police and the metropolitan police. They literally got into fistfights over jurisdiction like actual brawls between squads of uniformed officers complete with broken noses and bruised egos. Imagine calling for help and watching your rescuers start punching each other. Iconic, if not helpful. Back on the street, the arrested man is finally dragged away, cursing in a mash of Irish and creative profanity. The officers don't look victorious. They look tired. One limps. The other's hat is gone, likely stolen by a kid while he was distracted. You walk past them and hear one mutter, "Should have just let 'em go." That's not uncommon. Around here the police don't really stop crime. They manage it. Like janitors trying to mop up the ocean. Gangs, political clubs, crooked landlords. They all have their fingers in the pie, and most of them pay better than City Hall. You swing by the local station house, a grim stone building with peeling paint and a smell that suggests someone recently threw up in a stairwell and no one cleaned it. Inside, a sergeant is asleep at his desk, a drunk is singing in a cell, and a man in a suit is handing an envelope to a cop who pretends not to notice you noticing. You don't linger. Outside again, you pass a patrolman standing at a corner, twirling his stick and trying very hard to look like he's in control of something. A group of children run past him, one of them holding a loaf of bread he very much did not buy. The officer pretends not to see. He's not about to chase a barefoot thief for a crust of rye. Debate time. Did the early police make things better or worse? Some historians argue that even a flawed force was better than none at all. That before the police, gangs enforced their own brand of justice, which usually involved bricks. Others argue that early police were so hopelessly corrupt and undertrained that they enabled the rise of gang power, turning crime into a negotiation instead of a violation. You see both sides. You've watched cops beat suspects in the street. You've also seen them save children from burning buildings. It's a mess. But then, what isn't? You remember a story from last winter. A cop named Dolan. A real giant of a man with fists like kettlebells and the personality of a wet boot. Everyone hated him. Then one day, he pulled a freezing orphan out of a snowbank and paid for her hospital stay with a week's wages. After that, people just called him Boots. They still hated him, but softer. Back on Mulberry, you see a new officer walking his beat. Fresh-faced, shiny boots, hat sitting a little too high. He looks hopeful. Poor soul. He stops you and asks if you've seen any trouble lately. You gesture to the whole street. He doesn't get the joke. "Well," he says, "we're cracking down." You nod politely. He'll either lose that optimism or lose a tooth. Probably both. You head toward the Old Brewery, where the real peacekeepers are the ones who've lived there the longest. Biddy with her broom, Sadie Flynn with her bag of salves and threats, Mary Larkin with her stare that melts buttons off your coat. They're not paid by the city, but when something goes wrong, they're the ones people run to. And if a fight breaks out, well, sometimes the cops show up, sometimes they don't. But someone always comes. You pass an alley where a kid is being shaken down by a man with too many rings and not enough manners. You yell. The man looks up, sees you and smirks. "You the law now?" he says. "No," you say, "but she is." And from the shadow steps Mary Larkin. The man freezes. He's not afraid of you, but Mary. Mary's different. He lets the kid go. She doesn't even speak, just stares, then nods once at you. "Good eyes," she says, and walks off. You smile all the way home, because here's the real truth of 5 Points justice. The law isn't made of uniforms or courtrooms. It's made of people, the brave, the bitter, the tired, the stubborn. It's in the brooms, the bandages, the baseball bats hidden behind doors. It's community, wrapped in bruises and soaked in gin. And if the city ever does send real law and order, it'll have to ask permission first. It starts with a scrape on your arm. Nothing serious, just a little slice from a broken bottle as you are navigating a shortcut behind a tavern. You wrap it in a rag, shrug it off. Happens all the time. Everyone in the 5 Points has at least 3 healing cuts and one you're pretending is healing. But by nightfall your arm is hot. The wound's puffy and red. There's a dull throb you can't ignore, and your head starts to buzz like a wasp nest. Welcome to your next great adventure. Surviving medical care in the 5 Points. Spoiler, you probably won't. There's no hospital down the street. No emergency room. If you want a doctor, you need money. If you don't have money, and you don't, you find a sawbones, which is slang for the guy who might sew you up or might be drunk enough to mistake your shoulder for your liver. You get pointed toward a tenement near Worth Street, where a man known only as Doc Barney works out of a room that smells like whiskey and boiled linen. You knock twice. He opens the door with one eye half shut and a scalpel in the other hand. You explain the situation. He waves you in. The room is chaos, stained linens, rusted tools, a chipped porcelain basin filled with cloudy water. There's a cat in the corner licking something you hope isn't human. Doc Barney gestures to a stool, swigs from a flask and mutters, "This'll hurt." He wasn't kidding. Historical fact, 19th century medicine in poor urban neighbourhoods was, at best, experimental, and, at worst, criminal. Germ theory was still being debated. Anesthesia was rare. Antiseptics were a whispered rumour. Most doctors were self-taught, undertrained, or in some cases total frauds. In slums like the 5 Points, people made do with what they had. Whiskey for pain, spider webs to clot blood, and a whole lot of crossed fingers. Doc Barney douses your wound in something that smells like vinegar and burns like betrayal. He doesn't wear gloves. He stitches the gash with coarse thread, biting the end off with his teeth. "You'll live," he says, like it's a challenge. You hand him 2 nickels. He grunts. "Next time, don't fall on glass," or do, "keeps me in business." You stumble outside, vision a little blurry, arm throbbing like it's keeping time for a death march. You need a real healer, but that costs real money. Unless, of course, you know someone. You head toward the flats behind the chapel, where Sadie Flynn has her unofficial surgery. It's technically just her apartment. 1 room, 1 stove, 3 cats, and a cabinet full of wonders, salves, tinctures, boiled rags, herbs that smell like both hope and horse manure. She takes one look at your arm, smacks Doc Barney under her breath and gets to work. She applies something that smells like mint and regret, redoes the stitches with real thread, and slaps a poultice on the wound that immediately makes you question whether you're alive or dreaming. "You're lucky," she says. "Couple more days and I'd be sawing that thing off." Quirky fact, amputation wasn't rare. For infected wounds, burns, or crushed limbs, it was often the only option. But in places like the 5 Points, amputations weren't always done by professionals. Sometimes it was your neighbour with a good saw and a steady hand. One man reportedly performed 6 amputations in his lifetime, all successful, and all in his kitchen, his only tools: a handsaw, a jug of bourbon, and an uncanny ability to not throw up mid-procedure. You lie still while Sadie wraps your arm in clean cloth and mutters about men who think bleeding is a personality trait. You thank her. She swats you away like a stray cat. You leave a hunk of bread and the last of your coins on her table. She doesn't say thank you, but she doesn't throw them out either. On your way home, you pass a street preacher shouting about sin and sickness. He's waving a Bible and warning about the wages of unclean living behind him. A child throws up into a gutter. Another lies asleep on a stoop, pale and shivering. You've seen too much illness lately. Fevers, rashes, strange coughs that never go away. Whole tenements reeking of sickness. You hear whispers about cholera again, or typhoid, or something even worse. The city blames the slums. The slums blame the city. The truth is, no one's keeping the water clean. Debate time. Was poor sanitation the cause of disease outbreaks in the 5 Points, or the effect of an already broken system? Some argue the city neglected immigrant neighbourhoods on purpose, letting the filth pile up to punish the poor others, point out that New York in general was a mess. Open sewers, rotting meat, livestock in the streets. But in the Points? The density made every outbreak a guaranteed disaster. Back home you boil water, not because it works, you're still not sure, but because it's what Sadie told you to do. You clean your wound again, you flinch. You mutter some choice words about Doc Barney's life choices. That night you lie awake listening to the sounds of the building. Coughing, pacing, creaking beams, something that might be a rat fight or a toddler argument. It's hard to tell your arm throbs, but the fever's gone. You're still here, still breathing, still mostly stitched. You think about what would have happened if you hadn't found Sadie. If the cut had gotten worse. If someone else had taken your spot in her tiny room. You think about all the people who didn't get lucky, and you realise that survival here isn't about strength or even luck. It's about who you know, and whether they're sober enough to help you when you're bleeding. The next morning you pass Doc Barney again. He tips his hat with a smirk and says, "Still alive, huh?" You nod, then hand him a clean rag and say, "Try boiling these next time." He laughs like you just told the funniest joke he's ever heard, and hey, maybe you did. The first thing you notice is the smell. Not that the 5 Points ever smells good. You've long since gotten used to the ripe mix of horse dung, sweat, coal smoke, and the faint background note of something dead. But this is different. This is sharper. Foul in a way that sticks in your teeth. Like rotten sewage got married and had a baby made of bile. And when that smell shows up, something worse always follows. You make your way toward Orange Street, where people are gathering in nervous knots. You pass a man dragging a cart filled with what looks like bundles of cloth. You get closer. The cloth is people, bodies, wrapped tight. Pale feet sticking out at one end, faces hidden at the other. Someone mutters, "It's back." You don't have to ask what they mean. Cholera. Again. Historical fact. New York City was hit by several major cholera epidemics in the 1800s, with especially devastating outbreaks in the 5 Points. The disease spread through contaminated water, thanks in part to the open sewers, overflowing cesspools, and the fact that many families shared one outhouse per entire block. It hit fast, killed faster, and left entire buildings silent overnight. You step over a puddle that's suspicious, shining, yellowish. A man leans against a stoop, clutching his stomach. A child sobs beside him, holding a limp doll. Someone's yelling for a priest. Another cart rattles past. This one has a sign nailed to the side. City Sanitation. You almost laugh. The so-called sanitation crew wears threadbare coats and bandanas over their mouths. They move like they're doing chores, not dealing with death. One of them stops to light a cigar while his partner hoists a body into the wagon like he's throwing lumber. You hear one of them mutter, "By nightfall, this whole block will be carted off." And they're probably right. Debate time. Did cholera strike hardest in immigrant neighbourhoods because of their conditions, or because the city let those conditions fester? Some scholars say it was pure neglect, that the city didn't see the 5 Points as worth saving. Others argue it was ignorance, that no one, rich or poor, understood how water and waste connected to disease. Either way, when people started dying in droves, officials responded too late, too little, and usually with blame. You duck into a tenement to check on Mrs. Keating, the widow with the 3 kids and the loud opinion about everything. She's got the door bolted and a rag soaked in vinegar tied around her face like a beak. The place smells like boiled onions and fear. "They're taking bodies from Mulberry," she whispers, "straight from their beds. No warning, just gone." You ask how the kids are. "Still breathing, thank God." Then she adds, "For now." Outside again, the mood has changed. Streets that were full of noise yesterday are quiet now. People move like ghosts. Shops are closed. Even the drunks are sober. Someone's nailed a sign to a lamppost. No water from the pump. Use well on broom. You've seen signs like that before. They show up after the first 10 deaths. By 20, it's too late. Quirky fact. During one particularly bad outbreak, rumours spread that cholera was being caused by Catholics poisoning the wells to kill Protestants. Another rumour claimed the Irish were spreading it on purpose to take over more buildings. One man accused his neighbour of summoning the sickness with a homemade potion. The neighbour responded by stabbing him in the foot with a fireplace poker. Justice. You stop by the mission house, where reformers are handing out bread and vinegar-soaked cloths. A woman with perfect posture and a terrible hat is shouting instructions about boiling water and praying for cleanliness. A boy behind her steals a loaf of bread and disappears into the alley. You don't stop him. You head toward the water pump curious. There's a small crowd gathered, arguing. Some are yelling to shut it down. Others scream they need water somewhere. You don't get too close. That puddle near the base is the colour of sickness. You remember a story Sadie Flynn told you. During the last outbreak, she watched a family of 7 die one after the other. Said it took less than 2 days. First, the youngest. Then the mother. By the time she got there, the father was dragging his own mattress into the street to avoid dying inside. She'd been burning herbs in her room ever since. You find her now, pacing outside her apartment. She sees you, grabs your collar and pulls you in close. If you feel the cramp, she hisses, drink gin, not water. Boil everything. I don't care if it's from a teacup or a baptismal font. Boil it. You nod. You ask if it's really that bad. It's worse, she says and slams her door. By sundown, the corpse cart rolls by again. A priest is with it this time, murmuring prayers no one can hear. The bodies are stacking higher. A dog barks, then goes quiet. From your window, you see someone setting fire to a pile of linens in the street. Desperation burns easy. People believe smoke will chase off the sickness. You're not sure they're wrong. Debate time again. Did anyone actually understand cholera during the 1800s? Not really. Some doctors blamed miasma, bad air. Others blamed bad morals. Immigrants were accused of bringing it from Europe. Poor people were accused of unclean living. Very few looked at the water. It would take decades, and a few brilliant, mostly ignored scientists, before cities understood that the problem was beneath their feet. That night you try to sleep, but you hear the wheels of the cart again, creaking, squeaking, bodies being loaded. Your stomach growls, but you don't eat, you don't drink. You lie still, listening to your own breath and trying to convince yourself you feel fine. You wrap a cloth around your face. Not because it works, but because it might. Someone in the building starts to cough. Wet, deep, familiar. You don't move, you don't speak. You just breathe. And hope the morning still finds you alive. The bell is ringing, and not a church bell, not a school bell, not even the grim clang of a corpse cart. This one's sharper, hungrier. It's the fire bell. You sit up fast, heart hammering, breath caught in your throat. Because in the 5 points, fire is everyone's problem. It doesn't care if you're rich or poor, Catholic or Protestant, gang or granny, it just eats. And most of these buildings, dry as tinder, made of wood, stacked tight like drunken dominoes. Once one goes, the rest follow. You run to the window and see smoke rising, thick and black, curling through the sky like it's trying to strangle the moon. Somewhere near Cross Street from the looks of it. You throw on your boots, grab your coat and sprint down the stairs, nearly tripping over a neighbour already halfway to panic. Outside, the street's chaos, people yelling, buckets sloshing, babies crying. Someone's shouting about a mother still inside. Another person's throwing what might be silverware out of a 3rd-story window. A kettle clatters to the ground. No one flinches. And then you hear them. The fire companies, barreling down the street, hauling their pump wagons like war chariots. Not sirens, bells, clanging, clattering, and always preceded by shouting and fists. Here comes the Red Rover Company. Their uniforms look more like gang colours. Bright red shirts, black belts, and expressions that say, "We're here to fight something, doesn't matter what." Behind them, another company. You can't make out the number, but it doesn't matter. These aren't firemen like you picture. These are gangs with hoses. Historical fact. In 19th century New York, fire departments were privately operated, often volunteer-run, and deeply tied to local gangs and political clubs. Firefighters fought fires, yes, but they also fought each other for the right to put out the blaze. First company to get their hose on the flames got paid. So if a rival beat you there, you beat them, sometimes literally. The building could burn while 2 companies punched each other into the street, You watch it happen now. Red Rover arrives first. They start unrolling their hose, positioning their pump wagon. Then Company 49 rolls in, loud, arrogant, determined. They shout, "This is our fire!" Red Rover disagrees, strongly. Within seconds, it's fists. Hose nozzles get used as clubs. One guy swings a wrench and knocks someone clean into a fish cart. Another grabs a ladder like it's a jousting pole. And all the while, the building keeps burning. Quirky fact. Rival fire companies sometimes sabotaged each other's equipment, cutting hoses, hiding pump handles. In one legendary incident, a company greased a rival's ladder rungs just before a major blaze result. One very bruised firefighter and a house that burned to the ground. Meanwhile, the neighbours are doing what they always do, saving themselves. Buckets are flying, blankets soaked in muddy water. A line of children pass up pails while shouting instructions that no one listens to. Somewhere, a dog is barking loud enough to crack glass. You join the bucket line without thinking. Water's coming from a nearby well, dragged up one slow crank at a time. By the time it reaches you, it's half spilled and barely enough to douse a candle, but you throw it anyway, because throwing something feels better than just standing there. Suddenly the building's upper floor collapses with a roar, sending sparks and soot flying. You hit the ground hard, shielding your face. When you look up, someone's screaming. Whether from grief or injury, you can't tell. Debate time. Did these rival fire companies cause more harm than good? Some historians say yes. Their refusal to cooperate let countless buildings burn and fueled corruption. Others argue they were just doing the best they could in a system designed to fail. Volunteers, underfunded, poorly equipped, and caught in the mess of gang politics. After all, who else was going to show up when the flames started climbing? Eventually someone gets the water flowing. It's not much, a sad, inconsistent stream, but it hits the lower floors of the tenement and starts to sizzle. Then, miracle of miracles, the companies call a truce. Maybe the captain threatened to pull their beer privileges. Maybe someone reminded them there were still people inside either way. They stop punching and start pumping. The fire hisses. People cheer. One guy passes out from smoke or excitement. Either way, he's carried to safety. You help form a human chain to get a child down from a second-story window. Her face is streaked with ash, and her voice is gone. But she clutches your hand like she's grabbing onto life itself, and you don't let go. By dawn, the fire's out. Or mostly. The building is half a skeleton now, blackened and soggy. A pile of ruin where 3 families lived yesterday. One of the firefighters lights a cigar using a still-glowing ember, because of course he does. You sit on the curb, clothes soaked, skin singed, fingers trembling. Around you, people are picking through the ashes, salvaging what they can, a dented pot, a burned Bible, a lopsided chair. It's not much, but it's something. The firemen pose for a picture. A photographer has shown up lugging his massive camera. They grin like they just won a prize fight. You don't smile, you don't cry either, you just breathe, slow, careful. Because in the 5 points, fire doesn't just take homes, it takes time, it takes trust, it takes another piece of your already shredded sense of safety. You walk home barefoot, your boots ruined, your feet blistered, but you walk. And as you pass another company wheeling their wagon down the street, one of the firemen gives you a nod. Just once. Just enough to say, "We made it through." You nod back, but you know they'll be fighting again by tomorrow, probably sooner. You're watching a man eat an entire roast chicken with his bare hands in the back of a smoke-filled saloon when you realise something odd. No one in this room is really here for the food. Sure, there's stew on the stove, whiskey on tap, a few game tables and a piano that's seen better centuries. But the real action's at the far end of the room, past the laughter and the clinking glasses, back where the cigar smoke gets so thick it feels like you're swimming through someone's lungs. That's where the real deals happen. The nods, the winks, the pocketed envelopes, and seated at the centre of it all, casually gnawing on a cigar and half smiling like a man who owns the moon, is the most powerful crook in the city, William Boss Tweed. Historical fact. William McGeer Tweed was the head of Tammany Hall in the mid-1800s, a democratic political machine that ran New York City like a privately owned casino under Tweed's leadership. Tammany wasn't just corrupt, it was the law. They handed out jobs, housing and favours in exchange for votes and loyalty. Need a licence, a building permit, a new identity. Talk to the boss. Just be sure your hat's in your hands and your bribes in your boot. You sit down at a table near the back, pretending not to watch him. Everyone's pretending, but you feel it. the gravitational pull of that man. His voice is low, his laugh deep. Every time he points a finger, someone rushes to take notes. Next to him is a man you recognize from the courthouse. Next to that guy, a saloon keeper who just accidentally won a city contract to supply food to the workhouse. It's all a tangle of politics and crime, so tight and greasy you could fry potatoes in it. You once thought gang leaders were the most dangerous men in the 5 points. You were wrong. Tweed's reach is longer. His fists are other people's fists. He doesn't need to break your legs. He'll just tax them. Or worse, forget you exist. You sip your drink and listen. Turns out Tammany's buying up half of the buildings on Baxter Street. Not because they need housing, but because they control who gets to live their immigrant families. Rent them a room, political enemies, evict them at midnight, friendly gang leader, give him the top floor, no rent, and let him run dice games on Sundays. Quirky fact. Tammany Hall once charged the city over $1 million for a $250,000 courthouse project. They billed $7,000 for chairs, $170,000 for plastering, and one carpenter got paid more than the total number of working hours in a year. It was so obvious it would have been funny, if it hadn't been your taxes. You leave the saloon before anyone notices your curiosity is starting to show. Outside, the street's quieter, but the whispers follow you down Mott, across Canal, through Mulberry Bend. Everyone owes someone something, even the street sweepers, especially the street sweepers. Debate time. Was Boss Tweed a villain or a visionary? Some historians argue that his corruption, while massive, came with benefits. He built hospitals, improved infrastructure, and gave the poor access to city services in ways no one else had. Others say that's like applauding a thief for giving you back half your wallet after draining your account. Either way, Tweed is a fixture here. Too powerful to fight, too useful to ignore. You drop in at a grocer who also sells votes quietly. He's handing out small bags of flour and buttons that mark you as a friend of Tammany. The idea? Show up at the polls wearing the button, vote the way you're told, get a bag of food and maybe a new coat. It's democracy. 5-point style. One man asks if he can vote twice. 3 times if you wear a different hat each time, the grocer jokes. No one laughs. Because it's not a joke. You keep walking, pausing when you hear a commotion near a schoolhouse. 2 men arguing, loudly. One's demanding a teaching post. The other, younger, says he earned it. Boss Tweed settles the debate through a third party 5 minutes later. The older man gets the job. The younger man gets a quiet warning to keep his mouth shut if he ever wants to work again. This city doesn't just run on money. It runs on favours, on fear, on the understanding that power doesn't live in the law books. It lives in the corner booth of a bar with a back room no one talks about. Later, at the mission house, one of the reformers complains to you about the state of city government. Rotten to the bones, he says. The Irish vote for these monsters, then wonder why their streets are full of rats. You point out that if no one else offers bread, of course they'll take it from the devil. He doesn't like that. But you're not wrong. The thing is, Tammany feeds the poor, not because they care, but because they know a full belly votes better than an empty one, and they protect the slums, not out of love, but out of strategy. The 5 points is a fortress of votes, a tangle of loyalty and dependence that they've mastered like a puppeteer with 50 strings. And sure, sometimes someone squeaks too loudly, a reporter, a reformer, a preacher with too much energy. They disappear. Or worse, they suddenly own a lovely little home out in Brooklyn and never bother the city again. You pass City Hall on your way home and stare up at its pale columns, glowing ghost-like in the gaslight. You wonder how many decisions were made today without a single pen touching paper. How many bribes changed hands? How many street brawls were approved in that back room with the cigar smoke and the roast chicken? Then you remember what Big Mary once told you, while darning socks and sipping gin like it was medicine. People think the gangs run the points, she said, but the gangs just spill the blood. Tammany drinks it. And you believed her. You still do. You don't get a lot of peace in the 5 points, but every now and then, between the brawls and the bribes, the fires and the fists, you catch a glimmer of something else. Music. Laughter. A thump of boots on old wood floors. It's after dark and you follow the sound like a moth to a flame. Down Baxter, through a crooked alley, past a chalk drawing of something that might be a cat, or a demon, depending on your mood. And there it is. Dugan's Hall. 2 stories of sweat, booze, and thudding rhythm. No sign on the door, just the music spilling out of it like steam. You step inside, it hits you all at once. Heat, noise, motion. The dance hall is alive, pulsing with bodies and footwork and breathless energy. There's a fiddler perched on a crate in the corner, bow dancing like it's being chased a drum, keeping time with something that feels like a racing heartbeat. Somewhere, a tin whistle joins in with a sharp little laugh. The crowd moves as one. Irish step, African shuffle, wild new hybrids that don't have names yet. The floor's sticky, the ceiling's low, and the air is thick enough to chew, but no one cares. They're dancing like the city isn't burning down around them. And in here, it isn't. Not tonight. Historical fact. Dance halls were a major part of slum nightlife in 1800s New York, especially in immigrant-heavy areas like the 5 Points. They offered cheap drinks, live music, and a way to blow off steam. But they weren't just about fun. They were also breeding grounds for rebellion, romance, and resistance. People formed bonds here, made plans, found escape, and sometimes got stabbed. But hey, atmosphere. You push through the crowd and catch sight of someone you didn't expect. Sadie Flynn, hair pinned back, dress patched but clean, twirling with a grin that makes her look 10 years younger. She spins a boy in suspenders who nearly falls trying to keep up. She cackles. Then she sees you. She winks. You laugh. Even Big Mary is here, sitting in the corner like a queen on her throne. She's got a mug in one hand and an eye on everything. When two dancers bump too hard, she snaps her fingers. The offenders separate like scolded dogs. No one argues with Mary, even when she's off duty. You find yourself a spot near the edge of the floor. A girl offers you a drink. You accept it without asking what it is. Burnt sugar and regret stronger than anything you've had in weeks. And then someone grabs your hand. Dance, they say. You hesitate. Dance now, they repeat. You do. Your feet remember before your brain does. 1, 2, 3, turn, stomp. It's clumsy, hilarious, exhilarating. You nearly collide with a man the size of a wagon. He grins, tips his hat, and spins his partner so fast she shrieks with joy. It's a party, sure, but it's also a network. You spot a known pickpocket whispering in the ear of a Tammany fixer, a gang runner passing a note to a barkeep, a woman slipping a coin to a fiddler who, moments later, starts playing a very specific tune. The signal for something. Maybe a deal, maybe a truce. Quirky fact. Some 5 Points dance halls were run entirely by gangs, not as a criminal front, but as a way to keep order among rivals. Neutral ground, they called it. You wanted to brawl? Take it outside. Inside, there were rules, and breaking them meant getting tossed, head first, into the gutter. One woman, known only as Nettie the Knife, was famous for enforcing those rules with a blade hidden in her corset. No one ever skipped her entrance fee. You take a break, sweat running down your back, throat dry, head spinning, but in a good way. Across the room, 2 men are arm wrestling for what appears to be ownership of a hat nearby. A woman with a voice like gravel is singing a ballad about a sailor who married a ghost. Debate time. Were these halls a distraction from the slum's harsh reality, or a form of survival? Historians split on it. Some say they dulled the edge of social change, letting people dance instead of rebel. Others argue they were sacred spaces, where culture and identity could breathe. A way to carve joy into a world that had none. Either way, tonight they're all that stands between these people and despair. And there's something else too, something you didn't expect. Integration. Black dancers beside Irish ones, German beside Polish. Not perfect harmony, but shared rhythm. You'd be hard-pressed to find this anywhere else in the city. Uptown is still drawing colour lines in the dirt, but down here, everyone steps to the same beat. One young man does something with his feet that looks like magic. The crowd roars. Another jumps in with a rival style. Faster, tighter, grittier, a dance battle. You've heard of these. The kind where entire reputations are won or lost in 30 seconds. You watch as cheers rise, coins change hands, and someone throws a pork bone for reasons no one explains. Eventually the music slows. The fiddler plays a mournful tune, something Irish and old. Couples sway. A girl lays her head on her partner's shoulder. Someone yawns. Another man passes out completely, face first into a bowl of stew. You leave before the room dims completely. It's safer that way. Joy, after all, can turn real fast in the Points, especially when mixed with alcohol and unresolved grudges. You step into the cool night, body aching in that warm, satisfying way. The city still smells like smoke and sewage, but for once you don't mind. Behind you the music fades. You keep walking and you feel lighter, not safe, never safe. But for the first time in a long while, alive. You hear the fire before you see it. Not the crackling of flames or the whoosh of collapsing timber, those come later. What you hear first is the roar of a crowd, and not the usual riot roar either. This one is different, angrier, hotter, a noise that climbs out of people's throats like it's trying to become something larger than any of them. You follow it, of course you do, because curiosity is a stronger instinct than survival, always has been. It leads you up Fifth Avenue, far from the slums, past the stone mansions of those who sip brandy and debate morality from velvet chairs. The streets here are wider, cleaner, quieter, except tonight. Tonight they're full of rage, and ahead, silhouetted against the flickering sky, stands a massive brick building now belching fire and smoke from its top floors. The coloured orphan asylum is burning. You stop, blink, try to understand, but there's no making sense of this. Historical fact. On July 13th, 1863, the first day of the draft riots, a mob of white rioters set fire to the coloured orphan asylum on Fifth Avenue and 43rd Street. Over 200 black children lived there at the time. The attack was premeditated, targeted and brutal. The children escaped thanks to a few courageous staff members and reformers who faced down the mob with nothing but guts and prayer. But the building was destroyed, and the trauma left deep scars across the city. You edge closer. The crowd is howling, throwing bricks, torching mattresses. A few are breaking windows with crowbars and clubs. Smoke curls into the sky like a question no one wants to answer. They're shouting, "They take our jobs!" followed by cheers. You look around, searching for order. There is none. No police, no fire brigade, just fury. Quirky fact. The orphanage, founded by black and white abolitionists, was built to house and educate the most vulnerable. Black children who'd lost their parents to poverty, disease or slavery. Its mission was compassion. Its sin, according to the mob, simply existing in a world that didn't want to see black children live better than poor white men. You spot a cluster of nuns near the door, 3 women in long smoke-dusted robes, desperately guiding children out through a side entrance. The older ones help the younger. One girl clutches a wooden spoon like it's a weapon. Another holds her brother's hand so tightly his fingers turn pale. You count heads, too many still inside. You break from the crowd and run toward them. No one stops you. Why would they? You're just another smudge of soot and sweat in the night. You help carry a boy with a twisted ankle. His face is streaked with ash and terror. He doesn't speak, just stares at the flames as if they might spell something. "Get to the park," one nun whispers. "Don't stop. Don't turn back." You do as you're told. In the chaos, someone throws a bottle at the escaping children. It shatters harmlessly, but the message is loud enough. This isn't just about property. This is hate. You get the boy to safety, then return to the edge of the square. You can't help it. You have to see. By now the roof is caving in. The sky glows orange. The mob is still cheering. And somewhere, someone's playing a fiddle again, because of course they are. There's always music in the 5 points, even when it shouldn't be. Debate time. Was this atrocity the act of a few extremists, or proof of something darker running through the veins of the city? Historians argue about whether the burning of the orphanage was an isolated horror or an inevitable outcome of unchecked racism, poverty, and political manipulation. Either way, no one was ever truly held accountable. No trial, no justice, just ashes. You see a reformer from the mission house, eyes wide, face pale, trying to get past the mob with a sack of blankets. He's shoved to the ground, someone kicks him. He curls up and waits for the violence to move on. You pull him up when it's over. He doesn't thank you, just stares at the flames like they owe him an apology. Later, the fire finally dies. The building is gone. Blackened brick, a scorched sign, a single charred rocking horse lying in the gutter like a broken memory. The children, you're told, made it to safety, huddled in the homes of the few who dared to open their doors. Some will be sent to other shelters, some will disappear. No one knows for sure. You walk home in silence. The city feels darker now, not just night dark, but hollow, like a place that's just shown you its teeth. People talk the next morning. They always do. Some say it was a tragedy. Others say the building had it coming. Someone mentions the kids and gets silence in return. In the slums, it's business as usual. The breadline is full. The gutters are louder. and somewhere, the Tammany boys are already spinning the story into something that benefits them. You pass a woman sewing in her window. She's humming. Behind her, a newspaper headline screams, "Orphanage in flames, mob unstopped." You don't read the article. You already know what it says. Back on your stoop, you sit with your head in your hands and try to scrub the image from your mind. The building collapsing, the children fleeing, the crowd roaring like it was entertainment. And you wonder, when did the city decide who deserved to be safe? No one answers. Just smoke. Still curling up from somewhere. Still rising. Like the city's trying to remember what it's done. You've been avoiding the docks for weeks. Not because they're quiet. Nothing's ever quiet in New York. But because they hum with a different kind of danger. A slow, heavy tension. Less spontaneous than the 5 Points. Less chaotic than a gang brawl, but somehow more serious. Like everyone there knows something you don't. Something cold. Something profitable. Still you need work, and the docks are where the work is, if you can stomach the risk. So here you are, watching stevedores unload crates from a creaking British steamer, sweat glistening on their backs, shirts clinging to skin, muscles rippling with each hoisted box. You see men with bandaged hands, busted noses, and eyes that don't blink long enough to show fear. These aren't the soft workers. These are dock rats, survivors of a world that doesn't care if they break as long as the cargo makes it to the warehouse. The foreman, a squat man with arms like tree trunks and a voice like a foghorn, eyes you up and down. "You fight?" he asks. You say, "Sometimes." He grins. "Good. You'll need to." Welcome to the waterfront. Historical fact. In the mid-1800s, the docks of Manhattan, especially the East River piers, were hotbeds of violence, corruption, and labour wars. Longshoremen worked brutal hours unloading cargo for pennies, often under the watch of gang-affiliated bosses or thugs for hire. Unionising was nearly impossible. Protest too loudly, and you disappeared into the river literally. You start your shift dragging crates from ship to shore. The ropes cut into your palms, the boards creak beneath your feet. Everything smells like salt, fish guts, coal dust, and hot metal. You sweat through your shirt in half an hour, and then it starts. A fight breaks out near the grain sacks. 2 men arguing over a slot on the next shift list. The first throws a punch, the second pulls a club. Before anyone can blink, half the crew is circling like sharks, some cheering, some joining in, others just making sure no one forgets who owns this pier. That would be the White Hand Gang, or maybe the Swamp Angels, or the YOs. Depends on the dock, the day, and who bribed the foreman last. You're lucky this time. No one bleeds too badly. No one's thrown in the river. But the message is clear. This place belongs to people who take. Quirky fact. The Swamp Angels, one of the earliest waterfront gangs, actually dug tunnels from the docks into nearby cellars and warehouses. At night, they'd sneak in, steal whatever wasn't nailed down, and disappear back into the mud. The police didn't catch them for years, mainly because the police didn't try very hard. You break for lunch with a group of new hires, Irish mostly. One man shows you the knife he keeps tucked in his boot, for rats, 2-legged or 4. Another tells you he saw a dead body float in this morning, still had his hat on, he adds, like it's impressive. Someone else talks about the Black Hand, a rumoured splinter group muscling in from the Italian side of the city. Extortion notes left in sausage shops, fingers mailed in envelopes. No one says the words out loud, but the fear is there. Debate time. Were dock gangs just thugs, or a kind of working-class militia protecting labourers from exploitation? Historians split. Some say they were bloodthirsty enforcers for political machines and crime families. Others argue they were the only protection available in a system that chewed up poor workers and spat them out. As always in New York, it's probably both. That afternoon you help unload a crate labelled machinery. It's not machinery, it's rifles. You don't ask questions. The man who takes the crate away is wearing a sash under his coat and has the kind of stillness that makes your spine twitch. You go back to work. Later someone slips you a coin and says, "You didn't see nothing." You nod. You saw nothing. You finish your shift bruised, blistered, and vaguely terrified. As you're clocking out, if clocking out means telling a man with no teeth that you're leaving, there's another fight on the next pier. This one's bad. A man gets knocked out cold and dropped into the water. The splash is loud. Final. No one jumps in after him. Not even the foreman. You walk home slow, arms aching, back screaming. The city seems to loom taller from down here. The buildings watching, judging, waiting for you to crack. You pass the mission house where a reformer is giving a lecture on the dignity of labour. You wonder how many crates he's hauled today. Across the street, a group of kids are dragging a bag full of rags toward the laundry. One of them trips. The others laugh. The bag splits open. Rags, yes, but also something heavier. A broken wrench. Maybe a pipe. Maybe something worse. Everyone carries something sharp now. It's part of the uniform. You limp into the 5 Points just as the sun drops below the skyline. The tenements glow with lamplight. A woman on the corner is yelling about a missing shoe. Someone's cooking cabbage again. Someone else is vomiting just outside your doorway. You lean against the wall, let your bones settle and think about the docks, about the crate, about the splash. Then you think about tomorrow, and you know you'll be back. Because you need the coin. Because the gangs don't care if your hands bleed. Because the city never asks how you made your living. Just whether you did. You've just sat down with a crust of bread and something that might be soup when a knock comes at your door. 3 sharp raps. Not the drunk shuffle of a neighbour. Not a cop. Those guys don't knock. This is something else. A signal. You open the door a crack and see him. Skinny Jack, greasy hair. Ink-stained fingers. Teeth like crooked tombstones. You want to talk to the dead? He asks, eyes wide. I got someone who'll let you. You sigh. Jack is what the 5 Points calls a professional connector. A man who knows a guy who knows a guy who knows a scam. Today, it's ghosts. And judging by the twitch in his left eye, business is booming. You agree to follow him, not because you believe in spirits, but because it's either that or spend another night counting ceiling cracks and coughing into your blanket. You walk 2 blocks east, past shuttered windows and street musicians pretending their instruments aren't missing strings, and come to a crooked little parlour with curtains drawn and a sign out front that reads, Madame LaRue, seer, healer and certified communicator of the beyond. Certified by who, exactly? No one asks. Inside, the room smells like cheap incense and expensive lies. Heavy velvet drapes, a table cluttered with candles, skulls, real? Hard to say, and stacks of tarot cards that look like they've seen more spilled gin than visions. Historical fact. The mid-1800s saw a surge in spiritualism across the US, particularly in cities like New York. Seances, mediums and ghost photographers popped up everywhere, offering hope to the grieving and a tidy profit to anyone who could knock 3 times under a table without getting caught. The 5 Points had more than its share of spirit parlours, mixing religion, magic and con artistry into a single sweaty handshake. Madame LaRue appears from a side curtain like a cat in a thunderstorm, flowing black gown, silver bangles, and eyes that don't blink enough to make you comfortable. She welcomes you with a voice like melted sugar. Who would you like to speak to? She asks, gesturing to the chair. You don't answer. She nods like that's normal. Then we shall let the spirits choose. She dims the lamps, lights the candles, and places her hands on yours. They're cold. Too cold. You start to wonder if maybe some of this isn't an act. She starts to chant, nonsense syllables at first, then words that almost make sense. You glance around the room. A curtain shifts, a breeze, no open windows, a flicker in the candle, a shadow that moves when no one is standing. Okay, you weren't expecting that. And then, of course, the table starts to shake. Quirky fact. Some spiritualists used elaborate contraptions to sell the illusion. Wires hidden in sleeves, foot pedals that moved objects, even small children hired to hide under tables and knock at the right moment. One medium was caught mid-routine when his fake moustache fell off during a séance. The ghost he was channeling apparently had the exact same grooming habits. Madame LaRue gasps. She's here, she whispers. A young woman, pale, worn hands, sewing needle in her pocket. You stiffen. That could be your sister, or your mother, or literally any woman in the 5 Points. LaRue leans in. She says, You're not drinking enough. You frown. She also says, Watch your back. Someone's after you. That's just 5 Points common sense. Then the lights flicker. Not candlelight. Gaslight. A low hum buzzes in your ears. The table jolts. You push back your chair and stand, and she smiles. You've had enough. You leave without paying. Skinny Jack's already waiting outside, smirking. Spook day, he says. You shrug. Might have been the soup. He laughs, then leans in. Some of them, they do talk to the dead. Others, just talk loud enough to drown out the living. You part ways and head back home. But as you pass a storefront, you see another one. Professor Darrow, phrenology, hypnosis, mesmerism. The poster shows a man holding a skull like it's a teacup, claims he can cure alcoholism, back pain, marital woes and ghost infestations. You stop and stare. It's not just ghost talk, it's everywhere. People desperate for answers, healing, closure, justice. One man says his dead father told him to stop gambling. Another swears his murdered brother names names every Thursday during a séance. You heard a woman down the hall say she talks to her son's ghost through the kitchen stove. You believe she believes. Debate time. Was spiritualism a legitimate belief system, or just a hustle wrapped in incense and vague metaphors? Some historians see it as a response to grief in an era before therapy, especially among women who were excluded from traditional power structures. Others call it mass manipulation, con artists preying on the vulnerable. Like most things in the 5 points, it probably started as comfort and ended as capitalism. Back home, your neighbour has a candle burning in the window. She says it keeps spirits away. Another neighbour swears a ghost lives in her cupboard, knocking once when it's going to rain. Someone else is selling blessed buttons said to protect against cholera. And then there's you, sitting in your room, watching the candlelight flicker across the ceiling, trying to forget the sound of that table moving, the way LaRue's hands felt like they belonged in a grave. You don't believe in ghosts, you don't. But when the floor creaks tonight and your window latches itself, you pull the blanket a little higher, just in case. You're standing on your stoop watching a man in a bowler hat wave his cane like it's a wand when you realise something bizarre. He's not lost. He's touring. You blink, then look again. Yep. He's with a group. A whole group. Women in corsets, men in silk gloves. Not a mud stain among them. They stand clustered on the edge of Paradise Square like a group of delicate chickens let loose in a wolf's den. They've got umbrellas. Not for rain, but for sun. Because God forbid the sun kiss their pale uptown skin. Their eyes dart around, soaking in the buildings, the smells, the noise. You've seen rats with more relaxed postures. The guide turns toward them, raising his voice so everyone hears. And here, ladies and gentlemen, is the notorious 5 points, home to over 30,000 souls packed tighter than sardines in a Catholic confession box. He smiles, pleased with his little joke. No one laughs, but they scribble in notebooks. You shake your head. Welcome to the slum tourism industry. Historical fact. By the mid-1800s, wealthy New Yorkers began paying for guided slum tours of the 5 points. Reformers, journalists and curiosity seekers came in groups, often escorted by police or armed guards, to gawk at poverty like it was a stage play. These tours were meant to educate, but mostly they entertained, allowing the rich to witness urban misery from a safe, sanitized distance. You drift closer, staying just within earshot. The guide is gesturing at the Old Brewery, what's left of it anyway. Imagine, he says with theatrical flair, hundreds of families in this crumbling structure, sharing beds, sickness, and sin. A woman gasps. Another fans herself dramatically. One whispers, "Do they have toilets?" You resist the urge to shout, "No, Margaret, we crap in buckets and throw it out the window. Watch your head." You've seen this routine before. Every few weeks a new batch of them shows up. They arrive wide-eyed and perfume-soaked, leave wide-eyed and slightly less perfume-soaked. Some even drop coins on the street like feeding pigeons. They mean well, some of them, but most. They just want a peek at the poor, and not a real peek, a staged one. They want the ragged children playing stickball. They want the shoeless woman singing Irish lullabies. They want to glance at a pickpocket without actually getting pickpocketed poverty, with the edges dulled. Quirky fact, some enterprising locals actually ran scripted tours for tourists. Fake brawls, staged drunken fights, even rented babies for the day to pose as orphans. It was theatre. Slum life as entertainment. One man even offered slum dinners, where you could eat boiled potatoes in a tenement room for a price. You watch the guide steer the group toward a soup kitchen. They peer through the windows like it's a zoo exhibit. "Oh look, they're eating bread," someone says. Another nods solemnly. So sad. You wonder how they'd react if someone threw a bucket of waste at them. Not out of spite, just, because it's waste bucket o'clock. Debate time. Did these tours do harm or help? Some say they raised awareness, sparked reform, and brought the slums into the public eye. Others argue they were dehumanizing, a gross exploitation of suffering, offering sympathy without solutions. Either way, the people who lived here rarely had a say. You see the group pause near your building. The guide points upward. Many of these buildings are overrun with rats, he says, gesturing grandly. But the true infestation, my friends, is despair. Wow, poetry. Your upstairs neighbour, Patrick, leans out his window and hurls a potato skin in his general direction. It misses. Barely. You nod at Patrick. He nods back. Some moments require no words. The tour ends 20 minutes later. They vanish like ghosts back to their clean houses and quieter streets. They'll talk about the smell, the filth, the souls trapped in soot, and then promptly forget most of it over tea. You sit on the steps, chewing a crust of bread when a boy you know, Charlie, maybe 10, plops down next to you. "Did they leave tips?" he asks. You shake your head. "I tried crying near the curb," he mutters. "Didn't work this time." You chuckle. Charlie leans back, watching the sun slide down between buildings. "I heard they had chocolate fountains uptown." You grunt. "And bathtubs inside the house?" You nod slowly. "Some of them got toilets that flush." He goes quiet. That one always hits hardest. A few hours later, you see a girl, maybe 14, scrubbing her steps extra hard. You ask why. "Said they're bringing another tour tomorrow," she shrugs. Might as well look tragic. Smart. You wonder if anyone on those tours really understands what they're seeing. Not the dirt, not the sweat, but the resilience, the routine, the stubborn refusal to fall apart completely. The fact that people still find a way to laugh here, to dance, to live. No one ever takes that photo. Back upstairs, you lean out your window and see someone sweeping, someone playing a fiddle, someone arguing about pigeons again. Life goes on, even when it's being watched, even when it's being staged, because in the 5 Points, every day is a performance, just not the one they think they're seeing. You cross the bridge with a stomach full of nerves and a knife tucked in your boot. Not that it's much of a bridge, just a creaky wooden span with loose boards and a smell that suggests at least 3 people have puked on it today. And that's before noon, but it gets the job done. It carries you east over the murky trickle that calls itself a river, out of the heart of 5 Points, and into, well, you hope something better. Brooklyn. Historical fact. Before it became part of New York City in 1898, Brooklyn was its own city. And by the mid-1800s it was booming. Immigrants poured in, industries sprang up, and neighbourhoods expanded faster than the city could pave them. To many 5 Points residents, Brooklyn seemed like a second chance, a fresh start, a new slum waiting to be broken in. The moment your boots hit the other side, though, you realise something. Brooklyn isn't safer. It's just a different flavour of dangerous. The streets are quieter, yes, but not in a peaceful way. More like the silence between verses in a murder ballad. Buildings squat low to the ground, made of brick instead of wood, but just as miserable. The factories line the skyline, belching smoke into a sky that's already half ash. The air tastes like iron and sweat. You've barely taken 5 steps when you hear it. A scream, then a whistle, then the unmistakable sound of running feet. You press yourself into a doorway as 2 boys sprint past, one clutching a bloodied handkerchief, the other brandishing a slingshot and grinning like he just robbed the mayor. A third kid follows, limping with what looks like a lead pipe. So, Brooklyn's youth program is going great. You step back out into the street and start walking. You're in Vinegar Hill, a neighbourhood where every building looks like it was assembled in a hurry with spare bricks and borrowed prayers. Down one alley, you spot a gang of boys, bare-chested, barefoot, black-eyed, dragging something heavy in a burlap sack. You don't want to know what it is, you don't ask. Quirky fact. Brooklyn had its own street gangs to match Manhattan's, complete with absurd names and terrifying reputations. The Greenpoint Gutter Rats, the Atlantic Dock Boys, the Red Hook Runners, not as famous as the Dead Rabbits or Bowery Boys, but just as deadly when cornered. Turf wars flared up between boroughs like bar fights that never ended. Even the ferry routes weren't safe. Gang members would board boats just to settle scores mid-river. You stop by a factory, textiles judging by the noise, and ask about work. The foreman laughs. "You a Mick?" he says, squinting. You nod. No point lying, it's written on your face. He shrugs. "We're full up. Try the tanneries. If you don't mind smelling like boiled cow piss for the rest of your life." You decide you do mind, so you head south, toward Red Hook, and that's when you see them. A group of men sitting outside a saloon, each wearing the same strange cap, flat-brimmed, stitched with a crude RHR on the side. Red Hook runners, you've heard about them, bare-knuckle fighters, dock muscle, rumoured to be friendly with at least 3 corrupt aldermen and 1 retired hangman. One of them clocks your boots. You from across the bridge? You nod once. You running from something or looking for something? You think about it, then answer, both. He laughs. It's not cruel, just amused. Well, he says, standing slowly, either way you'll find it here. And that's Brooklyn in a nutshell. Not better, not cleaner, not friendlier, just familiar in a different way. The names change, the accent shifts, but the game is the same. You pass a corner where a preacher's screaming about sin. Across the street, a woman selling newspapers with one hand and juggling a baby with the other. A kid runs by with a sandwich he absolutely did not pay for. No one chases him. Debate time. Was Brooklyn truly a better alternative to Manhattan's slums, or just a side grade with slightly less press coverage? Historians argue both sides. Some point to cleaner streets, better building codes, and fewer tenement fires. Others argue Brooklyn's poverty was just as intense, just less visible, less photographed, less conveniently shocking for uptown do-gooders. You stop for food, a meat pie sold by a woman whose face says, "Don't ask what's in it." You eat it anyway. It's surprisingly good, probably rat. You're okay with that. You wander further into the borough, past rickety houses and muddy lots. You see children fighting over a stick, men gambling in the shadow of a smokestack. A man passed out in a wheelbarrow with SLOAN's hardware stamped on the side. Then you spot something strange. A park. Real grass, real trees, a swing set made of rusting chain. A small miracle in the middle of 1,000 bad decisions. You sit on a bench and watch the wind shake the branches. Kids shout. A dog barks. A woman hums an old lullaby in Italian. You don't recognize the words, but you recognize the tune, the rhythm of trying, the sound of building a life in a place that never offered you one. You close your eyes, just for a minute. When you open them, the sun is lower and the shadows are longer. Time to head back. You cross the bridge again, still creaky, still reeking, and return to your corner of Manhattan. The 5 Points hasn't changed in your absence. Someone's throwing a shoe at someone else. A street barker is shouting about discounted oysters. A fire's smoking quietly in a trash barrel like it's waiting to become something worse. You climb your steps, drop onto your mattress and sigh. Brooklyn was fine, but it still smelled like struggle. Just a different kind. It's just after dawn when a strange man appears on your block carrying what looks like a giant accordion strapped to his chest and dragging a trunk the size of a coffin. No one pays him much mind at first. Stranger things have shuffled through 5 Points, but then he sets up in the middle of the alley, pulls back the lid of the trunk and produces a gleaming tripod and a glass box that glints like it's from the future. You've never seen anything like it. He says nothing, just adjusts his gear with the focused silence of someone about to steal your soul. That's when it hits you. This man isn't selling anything, he's taking a picture. Historical fact. Jacob Riis, an immigrant journalist and social reformer, began photographing New York's slums in the 1880s, using early flash photography to capture conditions most of the city would never see firsthand his work. Harsh, unsentimental, and lit by magnesium powder, brought the 5 Points into the national conversation and played a role in launching social reforms. But at the time, it felt invasive, strange, like someone pointing a telescope at a drowning man and calling it science. The crowd around the camera begins to shift. Some kids hide behind barrels, others pose dramatically, hoping to be immortalized. You hear a woman say, "If he catches my bad side, I'll knock him into next week." The flash goes off. It's not a gentle pop. It's a blinding, sudden boom of light, followed by a cough of smoke and a strong whiff of burnt metal. Someone screams. A cat runs full speed into a wall. A toddler cries. The photographer doesn't blink, he just resets. You walk over, curious despite yourself. The man nods politely and scribbles something in a notebook. His eyes scan the buildings, the people, the filth. He's not here for beauty, he's here for truth. Quirky fact. The magnesium flash used in early photography was dangerously bright and highly explosive. It had to be mixed and ignited by hand. More than one photographer lost eyebrows, or worse, but it was the only way to capture images in the low light of tenement rooms, alleyways and basements. Riis famously carried his camera into some of the darkest corners of New York, sometimes with police escorts, sometimes alone. You ask him what he's doing. "Recording," he says simply. You ask, "Why?" "So people will believe me," he replies, and you hear something heavy behind his words. Like this isn't his first time trying to explain what it's like down here. He tells you he's writing a book, or a series of articles. Depends on who pays him first. He wants to show the world how bad it really is. You raise an eyebrow and say, "Bad? This is home." He nods like he's heard that before, but he doesn't argue, just asks if he can take a photo inside your tenement. You let him, because maybe he should see. The stairwell creaks under his boots. The walls sweat in the morning heat. He doesn't flinch when he sees the rats, just writes infestation in his notebook. He sets up his tripod in the shared kitchen where 3 families boil potatoes in silence. He lights the flash. The boom startles everyone. One woman curses him in Yiddish. He apologizes. He moves on. Bedroom, bathroom. The hall where mold climbs the walls like ivy. He photographs a broken window, a puddle of something questionable, a barefoot child asleep under a coat that smells like smoke. You ask again, "Why all this?" He thinks a moment, then says, "Because the people uptown think this is a myth, that it can't really be this bad. If they see it, maybe they'll help." Debate time. Jacob Riis is a complex figure, a hero to some, a self-righteous outsider to others. His work undeniably brought attention to slum conditions, but he also carried deep biases, particularly against certain immigrant groups. His lens was sharp, but not always fair. Was he a crusader or a colonizer with a camera? Depends who you ask. When he finally packs up, the alley is buzzing. Some people are angry. "He'll just make us look like rats," one woman says. Others are hopeful. "Maybe he'll shame those bastards into building real housing," says another. And some don't care. "Doesn't matter," says Patrick from upstairs. "No picture's going to change what the soup tastes like." You walk with the photographer to the edge of the 5 points. He thanks you, says he'll be back. You believe him. Because men like that, restless, driven, half mad, they always come back. You watch him disappear into the cleaner part of town, wondering what will happen to the photos. Will they end up in a book, a pamphlet, a museum one day? Will someone stare at your cracked floorboards 100 years from now and call it history? You doubt it. But maybe. Back inside, the smell of flash powder still lingers. Your neighbours are already arguing about how they looked in the photo. One woman says she was holding a spoon. Another says she blinked. A third says she didn't consent and now she's cursed. You laugh. It's strange, isn't it? To live your whole life in the shadows, and then, for one brief second, to be seen. Rain comes down like a punishment. Cold, sharp, endless. The kind of rain that finds its way into your boots, your collar, your soul. The sky's the colour of wet ash, and the whole 5 points feels like it's been soaked in bad luck and thrown out to dry, and you've picked this lovely morning to get hauled into court. Not because you did anything wrong. Well, not very wrong. Maybe someone caught you loitering near the docks, or maybe your face reminded a cop of someone they owe a black eye. Doesn't matter. In this city, guilt is optional. Arrest is a mood. So now you're standing in line outside the Tombs. Historical fact. The Tombs was the nickname for the infamous Manhattan detention complex, originally built in 1838 as a city jail. Its full name was the Halls of Justice, but no one called it that without laughing. Made of massive grey granite and styled like an Egyptian mausoleum, it was meant to intimidate. It succeeded. Inside it was damp, overcrowded and dangerous. Most people didn't stay long, but some never left. You get searched at the door by a man who looks like he bathes once per political administration. He finds nothing in your pockets worth stealing, so he waves you through. The hall inside smells like wet stone, body odour and decisions made under duress. You're not alone. Half the 5 points seems to be here. There's Sadie Flynn, arguing with a bailiff about how her dog has more moral compass than her landlord. Big Mary, seated on a bench like she owns the courthouse, arms crossed, daring someone to offer her legal advice. A kid no older than 9 is trying to explain why he was found with 3 sausages and no pants. The judge sits on a raised platform, eyelids heavy with regret and whiskey. He's not listening. He never listens. One case after another, he waves his hand, mutters a fine, or slaps down a week in the workhouse like he's dealing cards in a poker game no one wins. Quirky fact. In the 1800s, the court system in New York was notoriously corrupt and wildly inconsistent. Judges were often political appointees, Tammany loyalists who knew which side of the bread the bribe was buttered on. Some cases were decided before the defendant even opened their mouth. Others were extended just long enough to drain someone of their last coin. Justice wore a blindfold, sure, but she also had a side hustle. Your name gets called, you step forward. The judge glances at the charge sheet. Loitering. Again. You shrug. He looks up. You got work? Sometimes he taps his gavel once. 5 days in the workhouse or $2 fine. You reach into your pocket. Nothing but a lint ball and half a peppermint. So, the workhouse it is. You're escorted back out into the rain, shoved into a wagon with 5 others. One of them is singing, another is weeping. The wagon rattles down slick cobblestone streets, passing neighbourhoods that are dry, clean, and completely unaware of what it means to be punished for existing. The workhouse sits on Blackwell's Island. Cold, bleak, surrounded by the East River like a moat of despair. It's where they send the city's unwanted, the poor, the sick, the petty criminals, the unlucky you arrive wet, hungry, and already missing the slums. The matron at the gate eyes you like your meat gone off. "Welcome," she says flatly. "Breakfast is mush. Supper's a prayer. Don't talk, don't smile, don't die in the hall." Charming. You're handed a uniform. Itchy, grey, and probably last worn by someone who didn't make it back out. Your bed is a plank with a sack of something mouldy. Your neighbours are a man who speaks in coughs and a woman who stares at the wall like it owes her money. You get to work, sorting coal, breaking rocks, cleaning hallways already full of footprints and broken promises. It's mindless labour, and your body hates every second, but you do it. Because if you don't, they'll add more days. Debate time. Were institutions like the workhouse meant to reform or punish? Historians argue both sides. Reformers believed in discipline, hard work, and uplift. Critics pointed out that many inmates weren't criminals, just poor. These were holding pens for the city's most vulnerable, dressed up as charity. And if you died there, they buried you in a shallow grave and moved on. On your 3rd day, a preacher visits, talks about God's love, about how suffering purifies the soul. You watch one man nod along while palming a stolen biscuit. Another woman starts humming over him, drowning out his words with something older than scripture. On the 4th day, someone tries to escape. They don't get far. On the 5th, you're released. No one says goodbye. No one gives you shoes. You walk barefoot back to the ferry, clutching your uniform like it might still be useful. It won't be. The city hasn't changed while you were gone. 5 Points is still muddy, still loud. A couple's arguing on your stoop. Someone's selling onions out of a boot. A girl is playing jacks next to a drunk passed out with a smile on his face. You climb your stairs. The soup is cold. The ceiling still leaks. But the bed is yours. And in this city, that's something. There's a storm brewing. Not the kind that darkens the sky or rattles your windows, though to be fair, those happen often enough. No, this one's political-social. A storm of people and pressure, of fists wrapped in pamphlets and shouts echoing down streets already too full of noise. You feel it in your bones before you hear it in the streets. And then it hits. You wake to the sound of boots, marching, loud, organised. Not a gang brawl, not a riot. This is something else. You climb to your window just in time to see a flood of bodies pouring down Worth Street. Men in hats and coats, women with signs, children on their shoulders. They're not yelling in anger for once, but in unity. A protest. Historical fact. In the later decades of the 19th century, movements began forming across New York. Labour unions, immigrant associations, suffragists, abolitionists, and housing reformers. Many were born in the slums, or at least because of them. The horrors of the 5 Points became ammunition for organisers demanding safer homes, better wages, and something loosely resembling justice. The city had squeezed its people too long. Now they were squeezing back. You toss on your coat and head into the crowd. It swallows you whole. Thousands, maybe more. Banners wave overhead. Clean water for all, tenement reform. Now we are not your rats. It's the strangest feeling, being shoulder to shoulder with strangers and realising you're not alone in your anger. That maybe, just maybe, the people who built this city out of dust and blood are finally tired of coughing in silence. The march heads north, past the sweatshops, past the mission houses, past the places you've worked, slept, fought, bled. People cheer from windows. Some join in. Others just stare, stunned. And there, near the front, you spot a few familiar faces. Big Mary, of course, dressed like a general with her sleeves rolled and her arms crossed. Sadie Flynn's got a sign that says, "My walls have mould, what do yours have?" Even Patrick's here, holding a Union flyer upside down but yelling like he means it. You laugh. You can't help it. A group of factory girls chants beside you, their voices sharp with purpose. Children hand out flyers. A boy on a lamppost shouts, No more landlords with hearts of stone. And miraculously, people listen. Quirky fact, some of the earliest public health and housing reforms in NYC were sparked by these slum-based protests. One particularly influential march involved over 10,000 people demanding enforcement of fire codes and tenement ventilation laws. They didn't get everything they wanted, but they got noticed. Which, in New York politics, is the first real victory. Police stand at the edges, watching, waiting. Some look bored, others nervous. You half expect clubs to swing or horses to charge, but it doesn't happen. Not today. Instead, the march reaches City Hall and they stop. No violence, just silence. Heavy, intentional. One speaker climbs a stack of crates, an old dock worker with a voice like thunder. He talks about wages, about rent, about the rats in his walls and the rot in his roof, about the girl who died in a tenement fire last winter because the window was nailed shut. He talks about the orphanage, the riots, the ghost of the brewery, about every crack in the city that's wide enough to swallow a human soul. And then he says, "We built this city. We bled into its streets. And now we ask, do you see us yet?" The crowd roars. You don't cheer. You just stand there, still as stone, soaking it all in. Because for once, the 5 Points isn't being watched like a circus freak show. For once, no one's taking notes for their memoir or sketching a scene for their society magazine. For once, this isn't a tour. It's a reckoning. Debate time. Did these protests actually change the 5 Points? Or were they just noise in the wind? Historians debate the impact. Some say they led to sweeping reforms, tenement laws, sanitation policies, labour protections. Others argue the changes were slow, cosmetic, easily dodged by landlords and bosses with enough money. Still, the fact remains. The protests happened, and the city listened. A little. As the crowd disperses, you walk home, exhausted, exhilarated, cautious. A girl is drawing in chalk on a brick wall. A man hands out leftover bread from a cart. 2 kids play hopscotch using squares named after the 7 deadly sins lust gets the most action. You step back into your building. Nothing's changed. But everything's different. Because now you've seen what happens when the rats start running together, when the invisible decide to take up space. And for all its grime and violence and heartbreak, the 5 Points did something no other place could. It took the broken, the damned, the tired, and gave them volume. You sit on your stoop as the sun dips low, casting long shadows across cobblestone and dreams. Somewhere nearby, a fiddle plays, a baby cries, a couple argues in 2 languages, and you're just watching, remembering, waiting, because change doesn't come all at once, but when it does, it usually starts here, so you made it. 30 sections, thousands of words, a slow wade through slop, shadow and survival in a city that barely knew how to spell mercy. Let's be honest, you probably wouldn't last a week in the 5 Points, not because you're weak, but because this place wasn't designed to let anyone thrive. It was a pressure cooker of people, dreams, fists, and filth. An accidental experiment in what happens when the world crams 100,000 lives into a few crumbling blocks and then looks the other way. But now, as we ease back from the cobblestones and flickering gaslights, there's something strange in the air. You feel it too, right? That low hum beneath the violence, that stubborn little pulse under the dirt and disease. It's resilience. See, for all the gang fights and corrupt cops, the fires and funerals, the 5 Points wasn't just about survival. It was about adaptation. People danced here. They raised kids. They made jokes. Fell in love. Built something like community, even if it was held together with scraps and spit. And when you pull back far enough, past the grime and, more grime, you can start to see the shape of something else. The early bones of activism, of labour rights, of housing reform, of resistance. New York grew up because the 5 Points refused to stay invisible. So tonight, as you settle into your bed, let the echoes fade. The shouts, the music, the clink of stolen coin. Let the ghosts of Paradise Square whisper their last and drift back through the alleys, content to haunt someone else tomorrow. You're safe now. No more broken stairs. No more pocket knives under pillows. No more wondering if that shout outside is your problem. Just quiet. Well, quieter. So go ahead. Pull your blanket up to your chin. Dim the lights. Let the fan hum like distant foot traffic. And rest easy knowing that somewhere back in time a kid in the 5 Points finally found their way out. Maybe you did too.